Okay, so I'm Nisa. I'm in South Africa. I'm from South Africa, and I'm part of Middle Nation. And as you might know by now, that we're part of the Article 6 campaign, which was initiated and started by Brother Shahid Bolson around about in December or November of last year. And the reason why we started this campaign and why we've all decided that we would be a part of this important campaign is because it was triggered by the current genocide in Palestine. But I think that is more of the last straw. It's not the only deciding factor, because as you would hear as we present ourselves within or throughout this talk today, you will hear that there are many violations committed by the United States of America that we find very horrible. And we find that we are tired of having to live in a world where we're not allowed to speak up, or we're not allowed to take action, or if we do take action, then there is consequences to us and not the people or the perpetrators of the heinous actions. So Article 6 is the mechanism within the United Nations Charter that allows for the expulsion of any member state that is persistently violating the principles of that charter. And I stress on the word persistently, because it's not just something about where it's one action or two action or once every 10 years something happening. We find that there's no other country like the United States of America that is guilty of persistently violating the principles of the charter, whether it is physically, whether it is when it comes to contracts, whether it comes to violence. United States of America has violated in each and every way possible. So our campaign is calling for the expulsion of the United States of America, because we believe that that would lead to international peace and cooperation. It would lead to respect for international law. It will also lead to global peace and security, where we live in a world where each and every member state, each and every country, each and every person lives in a world where it's free from violence, free from poverty, free from any sort of action that does not allow for human dignity. So our campaign is directly aimed at the United States of America, because like I said, they're the only country that has persistently violated the principles of the Charter. So in order for us to be able to invoke Article 6 at the United Nations, there are a number of steps that we need to take. So firstly, which we are currently busy with now, the first step is to gather grassroots support. We need the backing of the public. We need the backing of every of normal people, you and me, our neighbors, those people, to sign a petition. And this petition is used to show when we go to the next step, which is to lobby member states to show that there is public support for this campaign. And once we get to our goal is to reach 100,000 signatures. And once we reach 100,000 signatures, we will then move on to lobby member states. And those member states, together with the petition, together with the persistent violations, the evidences of the persistent violations, will then go on to the United Nations Security Council, who will then take a vote on whether they will take this to the General Assembly. And then once the General Assembly votes on that, we need a 2/3 majority, which will then, if voted in favor, then the expulsion of the United States of America will happen.
I hear you. Okay, wait, so one, we need to get the petition to 100,000 signatures. That's what you're saying?
Absolutely, at least 100,000 signatures. We are currently close by, less than 10,000 to go. So we do anticipate we will be reaching our goal very soon. It is something that we've been working on every single day to gather signatures. And signatures, the reason why we need those signatures, like I said, is to show support for this campaign from the public.
Okay, now I hear you. Melo, just to clear up with you, we have everyone on board? I don't see everyone from the list that you send. Melo? Is it Melo?
Okay, yes, correct. I'm looking for the microphone.
The only person that hasn't joined us is brother Arian, I think.
Yes, I still cannot see him here, but that's fine. I think majority of us is here. And one more thing is that if Sister Namza could add Iman from down there to become the moderator as well.
I've added him. I've added, as to become a moderator as well. So it's you and then Imane as well. Yes.
Not Imane, Iman. Iman with
There's
the
another
number.
Iman in the line.
Oh, there's another one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I see.
There she goes. This Iman. I have not been added.
So
Apologies.
three.
Yeah,
Okay,
because
so-
sometimes the chat box go very fast, so I missed the name. Yeah. Sorry, Sister Iman. So thank you so much, Samantha. Thank you so much. So yeah, and also Sister Nonza as well. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone.
Okay, so I think we're good to go, right? There's no one else. We're ready to start. I think so. Yes.
We are ready to start, but once Brother Aryan comes in, we will do the needful.
We will do okay. So we're just waiting for one more person.
Yeah.
Guys from that have sent requests, kindly note that we're not taking any request from the public at the moment. We'll probably do it later on, but at the moment we have the A6 team here and they will be able to give us the information about Article 6, the initiative, what they're looking to achieve, if there's any questions around what it is that we, the public, need to do, what it is that I think globally, all pro-Palestinians, what it is that we need to do in order for us to get the US removed as a member from the United Nations. So I just want to, I think what we can do in the meantime, once, while we're waiting is, Mr. Bolton, if you want to maybe take the floor just to have the conversation on how it is that we got to this point. And then, we can just start because, I think maybe it's not a bad idea to start the conversation on what it is that we want to do, but also how it is that we got to this point. We do know that the ICJ had ruled that they need to evacuate. I think there was 123 countries that had voted and in favor of Israel moving out of the Palestinian territory. And we know that Israel is probably not going to do that. What would removing the US as a member help in terms of assisting that? So, I think maybe we can have that conversation.
Sure. Well, I mean, with regards to Israel, first of all, as Sister Nisa said, the impetus for this whole campaign was the genocide in Gaza, the G-side in Gaza, and the fact that we identified that quite early on, this was a G-side by veto. It was being empowered by the veto power of the United States. The United States was ensuring that this G-side would continue. And that because of the coverage that the United States has provided historically for Israel consistently, Israel has been able to enjoy impunity and has been able to enjoy unaccountability, just like the United States has. And so we identified that the real root of the problem, the real core issue, is actually American hegemony over the entire global system, which enables them to act with unaccountability and act with impunity all around the world and in the Middle East and with regards to Israel-Palestine. Because, I mean, the fact of the matter is that even this ICJ ruling is nothing new. The occupation has been deemed illegal ever since there was an occupation. It has always been regarded as illegal. It has always been classified as an illegal occupation, since there is no other kind of occupation but an illegal occupation. And there has been a vote in the General Assembly every year calling for Israel to withdraw to the June 1967 borders and to respect the international global consensus on the status of Jerusalem, the dismantling of settlements, and so on. This isn't something that's new. It's just another ruling that reiterates what the global consensus has always been. But the fact that the United States dominates the United Nations ensures that the General Assembly and the global consensus will never be acted upon, will never be implemented. So we identified that the core issue, and inshallah the solution to the issue, the solution to the problem, is in fact already embedded in the UN Charter, which is that any member state that persistently violates the principles of the Charter can be expelled from the United Nations, which would immediately end American impunity and, by extension, Israeli impunity. So that's how we got here, and that's what we're seeking. That's the objective of the campaign, to basically liberate the United Nations, and by liberating the United Nations, liberating the entire global community from American domination, from American hegemony. The United Nations has become nothing but an instrument of American hegemony, and so the only way to resolve that issue is to deny them access to that instrument that they have misused and abused for ever since the establishment of the organization.
I hear you. However, when it comes to the US and the fact that I think they're one of the biggest funders, or the West is one of the biggest funders of the United Nations, how would this make a difference?
Well, I think we have a few people on the panel who can talk about that more in depth. I would just say that, first of all, it's a bit misleading to say that America is the main funder of the United Nations. America is responsible for about 22% of the budget of the United Nations, which means that 75% of the budget, i.e. most of the budget, comes from literally everyone else. But they never seem to get mentioned, and they don't seem to have a say. So you're saying that, not you, but people are saying that the one who is providing 22% of the budget gets to have more say than the 75% of the budget that's being provided by the rest of the world. So the funding issue, again, other people on the panel can discuss it more in depth. But the fact of the matter is that American money has been precisely the problem with the integrity of the United Nations, or the corrupting of the integrity of the United Nations. It's been precisely by their money that they've been able to dominate and control and manipulate the United Nations and handicap the United Nations from fulfilling its stated function, from fulfilling its stated purpose. They've used that money, that funding, as bribe money, as hush money, as extortion money. Anytime that they want things to go their way, they threaten to withdraw their funding. And they decide how the funding should go, where it should go, how it should be spent, and so on. So the best thing that could happen to the United Nations is if they lost that funding, if they lost that dirty money. And I'll explain it even further, just in simple mathematics. Most of the UN budget is spent on so-called peacekeeping missions. If you look at where peacekeeping forces are now deployed, UN peacekeepers, so-called peacekeepers, where they're deployed around the world, most of, if not all of those conflict zones are conflicts that America either started or is perpetuating for their own profit interests, for their military industrial complex profit interests. So if the UN was actually allowed and able to do what they're supposed to do, which is to resolve those conflicts, which isn't what they're there to do now, because they're under American domination, because the UN is under American domination, and they're not there to resolve the conflicts. They're there to make sure that the conflicts continue, because their boss started the conflicts in the first place and is profiting from those conflicts. So if you were to just take, say, 3 conflict zones, just 3 conflict zones, say in Mali, in Congo, and I don't know, South Sudan. If you were to take just 3 conflicts and have those resolved, all 3 of those conflicts America is benefiting from and has helped to instigate and perpetuate. But if you were able to solve those conflicts, the money that you would save from the peacekeeping missions that are deployed to those countries now, deployed to those conflict zones now, would end up giving the UN more money than they're getting from the United States currently on an annual basis. because it's about 1.2. The U.S. gives them about 2.5 billion annually. Their contribution to the UN is about 2.5 billion dollars. I think for the Congo it's about 1.2 billion for the so-called peacekeeping mission. I think in South Sudan, I think it's another billion, and in Mali it's another 1.2 billion. I might have the South Sudan and Mali confused, but that ends up being more money than you would have if you lost the money from the UN, from the US, and you were able to resolve those conflicts. You would actually, the UN would actually have more money in their budget for expenditures than they have now, because they have to spend so much money maintaining the conflicts that America starts and perpetuates. So it's not actually honest to say that the UN would suffer in any way if they lost American funding, because as I said in the beginning, the whole problem with the integrity of the UN has been the manipulation by the US by means of their funding. Not to mention the fact that America is, the money that they're giving to the UN is based on the funding structure of the UN, which is based on I think the GNI of any member state. And China is already set to become the top funder of the United Nations either way, within the next few years. I think they're only about 5% behind America now. So within the next 4 or 5 years, they will already surpass America in terms of how much they're funding the UN. But again, there are other people on the panel who I think I can probably talk about more in depth.
Just to explain more about the United States funding, based on their GDP or their GNI, they are meant to contribute 27%. And because they have the largest economy and it is linked to the military-industrial complex, that is why they need to contribute 27% because they have the highest GDP. But what has happened in 1990s, the Congress passed a law that caps their contribution at 25%. So for the last 3 decades, they are already in arrears with 2%. Then they also don't make their payments on time. And as Brother Shahid mentioned, they contribute about 22%. They're not supposed to be contributing 22%. It's meant to be about 27%. So not only are they short paying, they are also not paying on time. And what has happened in January of this year, they were behind on their payments. And if your payment is not up to date, you are not allowed to vote, you don't enjoy the privileges, or you don't get to make decisions within the United Nations if your payment has not been made. But when they needed to use their veto power to block or to veto a ceasefire on behalf of Israel in January, that is when they quickly made their payment, which shows, just like Brother Shahid said, they use that payment to act with impunity. It's not about peacekeeping. It's about exerting influence, but the wrong type of influence, you know. So their payment is essentially, like he said, it's hush money, and they don't make it on time. They perpetually in arrears. So the United Nations and the world can do without that contribution, or the minimal contribution that they do make.
I hear you. Would you then say that the United Nations is an autonomous organization? Because personally, I've never considered the United Nations to be, due to the fact that they do have the 5 countries that has veto power. I've never considered them to be autonomous.
Autonomous from, I don't think so, especially with the corruption when it comes to the United States of America. The United States of America has corrupted that organization. Essentially, the United Nations is a good organization. The Charter is a brilliant document. The problem that we have is the corrupt element. And that is what we want to get rid of from the United Nations, is the corrupt element. So they use their influence, their power within the organization to commit, you know, I say peacekeeping, but it's in air quotes. It's not real peacekeeping missions. It's to get what they want from that country.
100%.
I mean,
anyone else want to step in? Yes.
If I can just chime in for a minute. Your impression is accurate. It's not an autonomous organization, and that's why we're launching the campaign. The perception that you have is the perception that everyone has. which is that the United Nations is basically just a place for the countries of the world to gather to be reminded of who's the boss of the world. You gather at the General Assembly. You get to say your piece. You get to say what you think. You get to say how you think that the world international relations should be done, and then America can say either yes or no. So your perception is accurate, and that perception is exactly why we're launching the campaign, because there's no actual reason why the United Nations needs to be that way. Now, if you look at the origin of the United Nations, it was never an autonomous organization from the beginning. It was, in fact, always designed to be a colonizing institution, an institution of colonial power, of the Western colonial powers. It was always designed to be that way. But the beauty of it is that because of their own hypocrisy, they have to put on paper all sorts of very good ethics and values and principles. They put that on paper. That's legally binding. The rules that they put down to make themselves look good that they thought they would never have to live up to. Because America thought, I mean, when the UN was established, it was right after World War II. So all of the former colonial powers were in a very weakened state, financially, economically, and so on. So America was, like, if we talk about America being the main funder or the biggest single funder now, it was much more the case in 1945 and throughout the 1950s. It was the biggest economy in the world with no competitor. So they had much more financial influence, economic influence in the early days of the UN, which enabled them to steer the development of that organization even more to their interests. But their relative power, their relative even economic power at the UN has been declining relative to the rise of other countries, of other member states economically, for the obvious example being China. As I mentioned, they're only about 4 or 5% behind the U.S. now in terms of how much they're funding. But yes, they intended for that organization to always be a mechanism for controlling the rest of the world. They always intended it to be that way. But as I say, they did put on paper lots of very good rules and principles and values. And the only reason they put those there was to make themselves look good, thinking that they would never be held to account, that they would never have to live up to that. Because, you know, the hubris and the belligerence of empire made them think we will always have the power. We'll always be unaccountable. No one will ever match us in power. So they never thought that they'd have to live up to it. But nevertheless, it's there in the charter that if you do violate the principles of the charter, you can be expelled. And the global power dynamics have shifted dramatically since the days of when the UN was originally established. In fact, it's the global power dynamics, as you know, have changed drastically just over the last decade, even over the last 5 years. The shifts in global power dynamics, economically, politically, and in every other way, have shifted so rapidly that it makes your head spin. And the rise of BRICS, the rise of China, and so forth, has changed things significantly. And you see more and more countries demanding to have a seat at the table and to have their voices actually be heard. And with the G-side in Gaza, more and more people are identifying, as we did, that the actual source of the problem is the United States. And I think that even the countries in the region have identified that the problem isn't even actually Israel. The problem is the United States and their sponsorship and the coverage that they provide for Israel. That's the whole problem. Because Israel themselves don't have the power to defy the global consensus. They don't have the power to defy international law. The global consensus, if the global consensus actually had a voice that could be heard, and if the global consensus could actually be implemented, well, the whole problem between Israel and Palestine would have been resolved before I was even born.
Agreed 100%. Is there anyone else that would like to add?
Yeah, if I can. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hello. Like, I understand, and we get these questions a lot during the lives, right? Like, we should just get rid of the United Nations altogether, right? We can all see, the corruption. It's obvious, right? And the manipulation of the votes by the US. Like, we all can see it, of course. So, we understand where this frustration comes from, right? But, we want to be, like, practical, right? We need to be realistic. Like, we are not living in a movie. We're not living in this fictional scenario, that people might be imagining. Like, we are living in this reality, right, where we do have international law, we do have agreement between countries, right, on global issues. And even from all of the votes, in the General Assembly, we can see that we do have a global consensus on most issues, right? We can see, for example, from the votes on Gaza. So, before we decide to tear down this only institution that somehow holds this global order together, right, where we have a place for negotiations, we have a place for discussion as civilized people, right? We need to think about for a minute, like, what's at stake, right? Like, we can, let us start by imagining, for example, a world without the UN, right? Like, this is the only place where essentially every country, no matter how big or how small, they have a seat at the table, right? It's the only institution where essentially these oppressed and destroyed nations, those that have been oppressed by colonialism, by wars, by economic domination, this is finally a place where they can stand up to these powerful, evil entities, right? And they can demand justice from the rest of the world, right? This is basically what we agreed on. Like, we're talking about different types of organizations, right? We're talking about World Health Organization, right? Which during the pandemic, we saw that, it was trying to globalify this global health crisis. We have the International Labor Organization, right? That advocates for workers' rights. We also have, the International Court of Justice, right? That's also part of the UN. It settles international disputes. And it's actually, the only international organization that, issued these arrest warrants, right, from criminals like Netanyahu and, his gang, right? So, and these aren't just abstract organizations, right? They exist and they're real. And it, took us time as, all of the countries to come to an agreement to formalize their functioning. Like, we all agree together, right, in a civilized manner, these institutions can usually be the difference between, life and death, between justice and oppression. And that's for millions of people around the world, right? So, if we dismantle the UN, we lose, this only international mechanism that is there for dialogue, for cooperation, and of course, most importantly, and what we are trying to address is accountability, right? Without the UN, who is going to step in to stop genocides? Who is going to deliver aid in disaster zones? Who is going to try to broker peace between countries? We have already seen before, when we tried to go into this isolationist state, right, where we don't want to cooperate, and that was exactly what led to World War II, right? And the world now does not need lesser or fewer mechanisms for cooperation. We just need stronger ones, right? And this is exactly what the UN has the potential to be. And as Brother Shahid mentioned, we have not seen the UN function in its proper manner, right? It has, been dominated and subjugated ever since the beginning. Inshallah, it will be something beautiful, right, where we can see that, countries can come together, they can work on something, they can bring benefit to the rest of the world. But inshallah, we believe that this is the potential that it has, right? And, just to be clear, we're not here to defend this status that it's now, right? Yeah, sorry, brother.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt you, forgive me.
No, not at all. It's just that we see, that there are problems, right? The US has been violating the principles over and over again, right? Illegal wars, manipulating elections, causing, revolutions in countries, causing chaos. It's basically destroying societies, right? Economically subjugating countries through the IMF, which is also an institution of the UN, and abusing its power, right? This veto power in the Security Council. So, we see the problems, right? But, we want to bring it back to where it belongs to, right? What we agreed upon. Sorry, brother. Please continue.
No. I mean, I was just going to say, yeah, I understand why people have this.
Sorry.
I understand why people get the idea that because we have never seen the UN operate effectively, we've never seen the UN operate, as Samantha said, autonomously. So we should just get rid of the UN. But you're misdiagnosing what the problem is. The problem isn't the UN. If you have a wolf in a daycare center, the problem isn't the daycare center. The problem is the wolf, and you have to get rid of that wolf. Otherwise, even if you got rid of the daycare center, you still have the wolf. It's still going to terrorize the neighborhood. Or you can compare it to the UN. We can compare it to a slave plantation. There's nothing wrong with a plantation in and of itself. The problem is the slavery, and the problem is the slave master. If you got rid of the slavery and you got rid of the slave master, well, you still have a plantation, that can grow beautiful crops that can feed the people. You have to get rid of the thing that is corrupting it, the thing that's making it evil, the thing that's making it detrimental to people, not to get rid of the organization itself. And like what we've been talking about, what all of the speakers have said, the whole issue here is accountability. So if you get rid of the one body, the international body that legally has the mandate for holding countries accountable, and you get rid of that, then you haven't resolved the issue of accountability, of America's unaccountability and America's impunity. The whole point here is that, alhamdulillah, we do have a mechanism. We actually do have a mechanism, a legal mechanism. It doesn't require you going out into the street. It doesn't require you coming up with some other alternative creative measures or sort of utopian dream scenarios. It's there on paper. All we need to do is implement what's there on paper. We have to just implement what is in the charter. That's all we're asking for, because alhamdulillah, that mechanism exists. All we have to do, the only thing that's required in terms of, like, for example, going out into the streets, is just to show that there's popular support for the invocation of Article 6, the invocation and the implementation of the existing mechanism to hold America accountable. And once you do that, then you'll see a drastic change. I believe that you'll see a drastic change in international relations if America is deprived of this instrument that they have been using for almost 8 decades to shield them from any accountability. That would be a drastic change in global dynamics and global international relations, I believe.
Mr. Bolton, would you or anyone else on the panel, you can answer this, would that not then apply to all the 5 bodies that do have veto power? Because they too have played a part in where it is that we are now, because they get to vote on that. And it reminds me of, remember when Muammar Gaddafi spoke at the United Nations? I think it was the only time he had ever spoken at the United Nations. And he mentioned that when they drafted the UN Charter, they were given a preamble. And yet what the contents of the Charter then was contradicting to what it is that they thought they were partaking in. So that being the 5 countries that has veto power, would that not mean that those 5 countries need to all be removed and every other country that is a member of the United Nations should play the same part?
Well, sorry, Brother Shahid, is that okay if I take the question? Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Iman, British, but my mother is Palestinian, my father is Algerian. Okay. I think it's very important to talk about the veto power, and I did want to address this question earlier when you spoke about it. And like Brother Shahid and Brother Kareem were talking about, the UN itself is not the problem, and the same thing goes for the veto power itself. Because when you look at the veto power, you realize that the country that has used it and abused it the most has been the United States of America. When you search it up, it does say Russia has used it the most, but that's actually a lie. It's actually the USSR that used it the most, so you're comparing 2 different entities. When we look at the United States of America, when they use their veto power, they use it to override a global consensus vote. It's not the same thing as when any of the other countries use it. Just like we've seen when they vetoed 3 ceasefire resolutions over the last few months. Those were 2/3 overwhelming majorities of global consensus votes, right? But when we see when Russia and China use this same exact veto power that they have, they never do it to override a global consensus vote. They never do it to override an overwhelming General Assembly vote. They only ever use it to override an American vote. They only ever use it to stop America from imposing their hegemony worldwide. And then we see the British and the French, who haven't even used this veto power in decades. I mean, the British alone, the UK, has not used their veto power since 1989. So we've seen that they haven't posed a problem with this veto power. The UK seems to abstain from absolutely every single vote that is coming up in the United Nations, in the Security Council and in the General Assembly. But you look at the United States of America, and what they do is they use this veto power specifically to override global consensus votes. And of course, always in favor of Israel. More than 65% of their veto uses have been in favor of Israel. Over the last 2 years, they've used their veto power 14 times. That means out of those 14 times, 12 of those times have been in favor of Israel. So why is it that we don't remove the veto power itself? Well, first reason, it's not everyone that is abusing it, and the veto power isn't the problem. And secondly, The reason why we are choosing to invoke Article 6 instead of removing the veto power, another reason for that, is that Article 6 is already an article within the Charter of the United Nations, meaning that it is a quicker and easier route to take. There is already a plan in place within the United Nations Charter that if any country persistently violates the Charter, we can invoke that article. There is no such article for the invocation of the removal of the veto power, meaning that you would have to go through the process of creating an article about it and then removing it. So that would bring the process up to even maybe a decade, because it would take you years just to be able to implement it within the Charter itself. So those are two very big reasons why we don't remove the veto power itself, because the veto power isn't the problem, and there's also no way for you to remove it right now, meaning that you have to create an entire process to be able to remove it.
Yeah, absolutely, and not to mention the fact that any reform. I mean, there's no doubt that reforms are necessary at the United Nations, with or without the United States. The United States isn't the only problem with the United Nations, with the functioning of the United Nations. Although you could say that they are the origin of every problem at the United Nations because of the disproportionate influence that they have had in the development of that organization. But the point is that any reform to the United Nations is a non-starter as long as America remains a member of the United Nations, because they will continue to have overwhelming power and influence over that organization. So any reform that you make will always be subject to American approval and American influence and manipulation. So they will only ever see to it that the United Nations is reformed in a way that consolidates and increases their power. But exactly as Sister Iman said, the veto isn't in and of itself the problem. The problem is the abuse of the veto. The problem is when you use the veto in a way that violates the principles of the Charter and in a way that overrules the global consensus. So if you want to talk about the real issue is violations of the principles of the Charter. The real issue is the violations of international law. So if you can do an evaluation of all of the vetoes for the last 8 decades and see to what extent any of the other 5 permanent members have used the veto power in a way that violates international law, then okay, we can have that conversation. But the use of the veto power, as Sister said, the use of the veto power by the United States has consistently been to overrule the global consensus, whereas the other permanent members who have even exercised the veto power, it has consistently been to overrule America, overruling the global consensus.
Yeah. Question, when it comes to the US's need to protect Israel, what is the need for the US to constantly protect Israel and the occupation of Israel in Palestine? There has to be, is it geopolitics? What is the reason behind that?
I can take this question again. I'm sorry. Well, Israel is a geopolitical project created by the West for the West. It's not a separate entity. Think of the United States as a body and Israel as their right arm. That's quite literally what they are. Israel was created as a project decades before they were even established as a so-called state. And they were put specifically in Palestine for multiple different reasons. They are a wedge between the Muslim world in the Middle East and North Africa. They are a wedge between the Arab world in the Middle East and North Africa. They are in a great geopolitical location because they have access to the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. They have access to Africa and Asia at the same time. They're in a great geopolitical location, a great social location, a great trade location. So economically, it's really great. And it's also a great religious location because it's great for the Christians, Muslims, and the Jewish people. So the reason I believe that the US is so adamant on helping Israel is because Israel was created by the West, for the West. It was created to make them more money, to funnel more money into the Western imperialist ideology, right? So I think I can actually pass it over to Brother Shahid now. I just wanted to give my little part on that.
Well, I think what you said, I think is, I agree with what you said, and you can make it very simple or you can make it very complicated. But the very simple way of putting it is, I mean, you just had a couple of weeks ago, $20 billion by the United States to go to Israel. That's actually $20 billion going to American companies. Israel serves a very vital function, or has historically served a vital function to the military-industrial complex. That's not conspiratorial at all. The rule in the United States is that when they fund these foreign states, roughly 70%, if not more, 70% of that money must be, by law, spent on procuring weapons and supplies and goods and services and whatnot from American companies. So this is just a device. Israel is a very useful device for keeping the military-industrial complex alive. And because of the fact that the nature of the occupation is obviously incredibly violent, incredibly volatile, and of course, you put in the context of the Holocaust, you put in the context of the Holocaust and the sense of vulnerability that is, or the perception of vulnerability of the Jewish people globally, and you put them in a region in a very hostile manner, that they can only maintain their occupation in a hostile and violent manner, you ensure perpetual instability. You ensure perpetual hostility and instability and conflict. So this makes it a continuous engine for pumping money into the military-industrial complex. Billions and billions of dollars a year. Hundreds of billions over the last decades. So, I mean, you can also put it in the historical context of the fact that until recently, America was not a net exporter of oil. It wasn't a net producer of oil and natural gas until the so-called fracking revolution. So Middle Eastern oil was incredibly important for them to be able to control, to have access to, and to control who had access to it. And Israel has served that function for many decades up until recently. It's less important. That function is less important now, and in fact, all of the historical functions of Israel are becoming less and less important as global dynamics are changing and the center of gravity of the global economy is shifting to the global south. The historical role of Israel in and of itself is already in decline. But the importance of Israel is basically has historically been this. It has been a mechanism for ensuring instability in one of the most resource-rich regions in the world, and ensuring America control and access and domination of the resources in that region, as well as being a tool or an instrument for endlessly funneling money into the American military-industrial complex.
If I may, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ali, an American-born Syrian. Everything that was just talked about ties into this. I see a comment continuously coming up that Zionists are in charge of everything. That is a very strong misperception. This is like late 1800, early 1900 propaganda. The idea that Zionists run the world and the Jews run the world. If Israel didn't have a utility to the West, it would have never come to exist. They are the puppets, and America is the puppet master. Make no mistake about it. This APAC, they're like the number 206 lobby in America. They're not even in the top 10 strongest lobbies. So the idea that Zionists run everything, that is a false perception. And America is more than happy to burn Zionism as an effigy if it means that they can get out of all their wrongdoings. But America is the one responsible for all these atrocities.
I hear you. Ali, would you say it's because of the fact that America, I'm going to say Jewish people or the Zionists specifically, because they control, or it's known that they control the fiat system, that is why they control the world? Because that's normally the everyone always says that the Jews control the world. Is it due to the fiat system? Anyone?
Well, I mean, I can address that. You're asking what's the reason why the Jews control the world, but the question is, why do people have the perception that Jews control the world?
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's basically because the people who control the world would like you to look somewhere else. This is a misdirection. Jews have a role in banking, certainly they have a role in finance, but somehow when you're looking for Jews, you overlook all of the Anglo-Saxons who actually control those sectors. when all you're looking for is Jews, then that's all you see. And you completely overlook the fact that the overwhelming majority of CEOs, the overwhelming majority of banks, the overwhelming majority of financial institutions are Anglo-Saxon owned. The largest banks in the world are Anglo-Saxon owned, except for the largest banks, which are Chinese. So this is just a misperception. This is a blame shifting tactic that the West has always used and continues to use until now, that they want to lay all of their crimes at the feet of someone else, at the feet of a scapegoat. Now, the Jews, or we should be more precise in our language, some Jews have participated and do participate and do profit from the system that the West has created and that the West runs. They are participants in that system along with everybody else. They have prospered from that, they have profited from that, but they certainly don't control it. I mean, even if you talk about, for example, I mean, I don't want to sort of derail the conversation to talk too much about these conspiracy theories, but when you talk about entertainment and media, that's another one that they say is controlled by the Jews. Entertainment and media today is controlled by conglomerates, corporations that are controlled by shareholders. There is no ideology there except for profit. If you look at like the origins of Hollywood, then you could say, okay, that the studio heads in the old days, in the 1930s, the 1920s, maybe the 1940s, the studio heads were Jewish. But compare the quality of the media then to the quality of the media now, or compare the moral quality of the films back in those days to the moral quality of films now. Everyone tries to attribute the decline in the moral quality of popular entertainment to Jews, but the actual influence of Jews in those sectors has been in decline for decades, and it has been moving into the simply corporate owned, conglomerate owned. These are mass media corporations that also have divided interests across multiple economic and financial and industrial sectors. You can't even find who owns this company or that company because they are corporations. They're incorporated. They're shareholders. So even the ownership changes. So this is a perception that they try to put forward. As I said, it's a blame-shifting tactic to try to make sure that you will never see who's actually responsible. Just like with what Brother was saying, that with the so-called Jewish lobby in the United States, it's not even in the top 20 highest spending lobbies in America. Raytheon is, Lockheed Martin is, General Dynamics is, the defense sector are among the top spenders in lobbying. In fact, Saudi Arabia spends more money in lobbying than the so-called Jewish lobby. But you want to pretend that all of these policies that you're doing for your own benefit, you want to pretend that all of that is actually, you're being forced to do that and coerced to do that because somehow you've been hypnotized by Zionists. No. Zionists are taking advantage of the system as it already exists. And that system would exist with or without a Jewish lobby. American support for Israel would exist with or without the Jewish lobby, because that's not why they're doing it. It's not actually that ideological, except insofar as it's coming from a Western supremacist colonizer mentality. But otherwise, no. It's strictly for the benefit of the military-industrial complex and the entire Western economy, which is not run by Jews. Jews have a role in the Western economy, but certainly they don't have the commanding role. This is just blame shifting, trying to lay their own crimes at the feet of someone else.
I hear you 100%. For those of you who have just joined, because I see that the numbers have increased drastically, just to get back to the conversation, we are speaking, I'm going to say, to the organization, Article 6. We've got Mr. Balson here. The topic of conversation is whether or not the US can be removed as a member of the United Nations due to the part that they've played in destabilizing and the genocide in Palestine. What is it that we can do? And obviously we've got the panelists here to answer any questions and also to give us more information around the organization, how to approach it. So yeah, because I've seen a lot of people at the bottom. Melo, you can just if you want to come in again and just let people know what it is that they can do, I will add the link in my bio after so that everyone can go and sign. We need 100,000 signatures. By more, guys, if we can. We are all pro-Palestinian. We know that if you're South African, if you're in Africa, majority of the African countries are. Go and sign this petition. So that's the start. The start is to make sure that everyone on the ground gets that petition running.
The US would have the power to veto any such vote. However, we have Article 27 in the UN Charter itself, which sort of prohibits any member state from voting on actions involving themselves. So if, since invoking Article 6 would be taking place against the US would be required to abstain from this vote. Then the other challenge we have is trying to lobby up the other member states and the other permanent members of the Security Council, like the UK and France, to either abstain from this vote or vote in favor of the invocation of Article 6. So, yeah, we would need to significantly raise the pressure that we are applying onto the permanent members. We know already that certain permanent members, like China and Russia, would be more willing to try and invoke this, but we would need to put more pressure upon UK and France to try and support us in this campaign.
Yeah. So we would obviously have to make sure that we get, I'm going to say specifically citizens, British citizens and French citizens to get onto the campaign. Because once we have people from grassroots putting the pressure on different governments, we are probably, is that more likely to succeed if we do it that way?
I think you're right. We have to focus on getting support from the British population and the French population. Alternatively, or additionally, support from their most important trading partners, because especially France. I mean, we've seen France being largely supportive with regards to the issue in Gaza in terms of UN votes. And the UK often abstaining. So we hope that we can convince them to take that same route when Article 6 is brought before the Security Council, that either they will vote positively for it or abstain from the vote. As Brother Aryan said, I don't think we have to wonder which way Russia and China would vote on that. But France, I think that, as you know, they are very concerned about the decrease in their global influence and their influence specifically in Africa and their influence in the global south. And I think that both of these countries, and Europe generally, to be honest, but both of these countries, since more to the point, the UK and France, are really at a crossroads where they have to make a decision, not just whether they're going to be on the right side of history, but whether or not they're going to be on the right side of the future, because the future is not American. And we've seen, since the Ukraine war, and since the sanctions against Russia, and really from before that, but that was, you can say, an escalation of an overall destabilization of Europe that's being led by the United States, and it's quite blatant. They're not really secretive about what they're doing in their policies. The deindustrialization of Germany is rapidly advancing. The economies are all suffering in Europe, in the UK and France as well. Forcing them to try to, they're trying to drive a wedge between Europe, including the UK and France, drive a wedge between them and China, at a time when they desperately need their relationship with China. They desperately need capital and investment from China, and they desperately need access to the Chinese consumer market. To force them to cut their relationships, first of all, with Russia, when it doesn't make any sense for them whatsoever economically, to sacrifice their own economies for the sake of Ukraine. It's not in their financial interest, it's not in their economic interest, it's not in their political interest. And you've seen the energy prices spike, you've seen factories close, you've seen record bankruptcies across Europe, and this is all being driven by American policies and by them agreeing to go along with American policies. So they're really at a crossroads where they have to make a decision whether or not they're going to make policies and make decisions about their future that actually make sense. And the only thing that makes sense is to try to repair your relationship with BRICS, with the BRICS nations, with the global South, and no longer with the U.S., because America is going to smoke them down to the filter if they get a chance. So I think that we need to not only lobby the people of France and the UK themselves, but also their most important trading partners who have influence over them. I mean, we just saw what happened with the Telegram CEO who was arrested in France, and he was granted bail following the United Arab Emirates expressing their displeasure over his arrest, because the United Arab Emirates has significant investments in France, and France has significant investments in the UAE. So the more these financial and economic relationships have developed, the more the balance of power between the former colonizing countries like the UK and France, the balance of power is shifting in the reverse, to where the countries of the global South are having increasing influence over those countries. And I think that holding on to this historic relationship between America and the UK and America and France is certainly not in their interests. And I think that the populations themselves are starting to see that. I mean, there was a poll recently that showed that I think it was 60% of the people in Europe believe that American interests do not align with European interests, particularly on matters of trade and security. And they're absolutely right. So it's a matter of getting I think the populations will not be difficult to convince, because they themselves are the ones who are suffering from the policies that their leaders are adopting in obedience to the United States. The people, the populations are the ones who are suffering. So I don't think it's going to be difficult to get them on board with supporting Article 6. It's a matter of getting the leaders to be on board with that as well. And I think we might be more influential if we can have the populations domestically supportive of it, but also their major trading partners, inshallah.
So you're saying that France, I'm going to say specifically France because they've lost a lot of power in Africa, aligning themselves with the BRICS nations would probably be in the best interest in order for this to take off?
Well, I think it's definitely in the best interest of France overall. I think it's definitely in the best interest of France. It's in the best interest of the UK. It's in the best interest of Europe to actually cut their ties with the United States and repair their relationship with the global South. They should repair their relationship with Russia. They should repair their relationship with China, and they should accept new terms in their relationship with the rest of the countries of the global South, and try to overcome the colonizer mindset, and try to sort of it would be a bit of a slight to their ego. But I think that at the end of the day, they're practical people, and they'll have to understand which side of the bread the butter is on, and that's going to be that will require them to rehabilitate their relationship with the global South. I mean, I think that the truth of the matter is, I don't think that the UK or France would view the expulsion of America from the UN as anything but a liberation day for themselves. Whether or not they have the guts, whether or not they have the confidence to support it or not is another story. But I think if it were to happen, it would be a liberation day for the UK, and it would be a liberation day for France, because they're being forced to follow policies that are absolutely against their interests under American influence and domination, under American coercion. They're being forced to follow policies that clearly are not in their interests, and not in the interests of their own populations, and not even in the interests of their own companies and their own business. So I think that our challenge is to get them to have the confidence to support what they know is in their best interest.
I hear you. When it comes to the
Sorry.
UK, though, yes,
Would
yes.
it be okay if I just...
Yes,
I just
please.
wanted to add on to Brother Shahid's point. It's important to note that when Article 6 is taken to the Security Council, the US won't be able to veto that decision, and that's why we're talking about the UK, France, Russia, and China. And I've seen quite a few people saying the US is going to veto it. They can't. Per Article 27 of the United Nations Charter, they must abstain because the vote pertains to them, so they can't vote yes, no, nor veto. So that's why we're only talking about the other 4 member states who have the veto power. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No, I hear you. When it comes to the UK specifically, especially considering the fact that the UK have such a history of colonialism, with the different South Africa being one of those states, do we think that they would play a part in wanting to rectify their past mistakes, like Mr. Bolton just mentioned, in terms of France needing to do that, or no? Because it's a question.
They will want to make you think that that's what they want to do. Obviously, that's not something that they want to do. It's not in their nature. It's not in the nature of their culture. It's not in the nature of their so-called civilization to ever do that. They will try to get away with whatever they can get away with. Just like I said, this is why they put in the charter all of these great sounding, wonderful values and principles, so that they can look good, thinking that they'll never have to be held to account for it. So they will be interested in making you think that they want to repair their relationship with you, and that they want to deal with you more fairly. And as long as you can get them to put something down on paper, then you can hold them to it.
I hear you. Anyone else want to add or have a point to make? No. I wanted to ask another question is, has there ever been a member of the United Nations that has been removed, any state that has been removed or gotten close to that?
I'll take that question. Article 6 has never ever been invoked in the United Nations. So no other member state has ever been removed using Article 6. Apartheid South Africa came close to it back in the day, but it has not been invoked before. Now that doesn't mean that Article 6 or that we are on a campaign that is not possible. And the reason why I say that is because the Charter makes provision for this in the first place. Our campaign is using the mechanism of, or we're using what is in the Charter, which means that it is possible, which means that there is a very, very high chance of success. And the fact that it has never been invoked before just means that it doesn't mean that it is impossible for it to happen. So, no, it has not. There's no member state that has done that. But when it comes to organizations, which is very similar to the United Nations, with the League of Nations in 1939, the Soviet Union was expelled from that organization. For the Organization of American States in 1962, Cuba was suspended. And then for the Commonwealth of Nations, Nigeria was suspended in 1995 following human rights abuses. So there is a history of other organizations doing it, but within the United Nations, this would be the first time that this takes place.
Can I just say something about that, and then I'm going to have to take a break for prayer. It's the Maghrib prayer. No, it hasn't been invoked before, and the reason that it hasn't been invoked before, there's two reasons. One, no one else qualified as a persistent violator of the principles of the United Nations Charter. There was never a need to expel a member state from the United Nations. Every member state has violated once or twice or here and there, but no one has violated it persistently except for the United States. And the United States may have been interested at one time or another to try to expel this or that country, this or that official designated enemy, but they didn't want to draw attention to the existence of Article 6 because they themselves are the most persistent violator. So they don't exactly want to draw attention to it. They don't want to remind people that this article exists because then it could be invoked against them. That's two reasons. Then I suppose you can say a third reason would be that it has never been realistically possible to invoke Article 6 against the most persistent violator, the United States. It has never been realistically possible until now, and I believe that it is absolutely possible to do it now because of the fact that the global power dynamics have changed so much. And now, if you'll excuse me, I just have to take a small break.
No worries, Mr. Wilson. I was going to ask why is it that no attention has ever been brought to Article 6? Because if you look at all the human rights violations and the amount of countries that are part of the United Nations, why has this never been brought forward?
There was a partial, a pseudo brought forward by Ukraine during about 3 or 4 years ago during the so-called war going on. However, it did not go through. So apparently people know about Article 6. It's just that no one has brought this forward because it seems so drastic. Like everyone has the same question that we do. UN needs America. America is is a big funder. So that's besides the point. So can we go on to questions about the rest so that we can move on?
No, I've got you. I think from my side, I've Nonza, do you have any questions? Is there any way that we can take questions from the guest on the live, Nonza?
Hi, Sami. I don't have any question at the moment, but I haven't seen any questions on the comment section. But if they can write their questions, then we can take them one by one. Those that I'm able to see. Thank you.
So someone asking, will this put sanctions against America?
Yes.
I mean, that's ultimately the goal, isn't it? To get America out of the United Nations so that we may be able to sanction them and stop them from persistently violating the charter. And if you would like, we have prepared quite a few examples of these persistent violations, so we can put this more into context for people who don't know. And I'll go ahead and start with the first one. And I like to start with this because it goes into showing the imperial status of the United States and how they do have colonies just like any other empire. They just simply hide behind words like territories and commonwealths. And one of those colonies is Puerto Rico. Back in 1950, Puerto Rico was an island that's been ravaged by imperialism for centuries. The people there were currently living as second-class American citizens. They can be conscripted and sent to war, but no one can vote for their president, their vice president. They can't have representation in Congress. By the way, that is still the situation today. Their finances and infrastructure are completely hijacked by the U.S. corporation. They were systemically forced into debt and lost endless acres of lands to the sugar and tobacco industries. Their railroads and shipping system completely under American control. So the prices of goods, of course, skyrocketed, more expensive than the U.S. or their neighboring Caribbean island. So clearly a revolt was just waiting to happen. And that's when Pedro Albizu Campos came in. That is a Harvard graduate and a World War I veteran who had spent the last 25 years in and out of jail trying to promote his anti-colonial ideas. Of course, in the meanwhile, for many people may have heard of this, the FBI were doing the Las Carpetas, where they were just massively spying on everyone in PR, which was like one of the biggest instances of mass surveillance against their own citizens. And it was a successful bit to try and create paranoia and sow division among the nationalists. But it all culminated on October 30th in 1950 when Campos and the other nationalists did declare PR to be an independent country. And the armed revolts, of course, took place simultaneously from the capital in San Juan and all across many other cities and towns. The U.S. immediately sent out 10 P-47 Thunderbolt fighter planes out of Ramey Air Force Base, which, by the way, is one of many bases that was on Puerto Rico. They bombed the island in what was the only time U.S. military attacked its own citizens. They unalived 28 people and injured dozens more. Obviously, this revolt was no match to this newly crowned superpower that was the USA. Harry Truman stumbled down to the press release the following day and just played it down as if it was some small and isolated incident. Of course, they left PR with absolutely no recourse to any international support. And within the next few days, over 3,000 nationalists were all arrested and jailed without any due process. Most of them spent the rest of their lives, some of them spent the rest of their lives in prison. Actually, there is a Puerto Rican judge in the U.S. that submitted the following to describe it. And he said, the end of the Second World War and the creation of the United Nations with its purported anti-colonial stance codified in its charter opened up new prospects for many colonized peoples. The United States being a principal sponsor of the United Nations and of decolonization by Great Britain and France was forced to publicly reevaluate its relationship with Puerto Rico and its U.S. citizen inhabitants. Congress took a strategic step in that direction in 1950 by enacting Public Law 600, which authorized Puerto Ricans to draft their own local constitution subject to congressional approval. Congress subsequently approved, after some edits, a Puerto Rican constitution that afforded a limit measurement of government, which included the right to elect governor, legislature, as well as a few judges. What followed was a rush from the United States to the United Nations to seek a dispensation for Puerto Rico from the UN. Reporting requirements imposed on those countries with non-self-governing territories. This was accomplished by much chicanery and arm twisting by the representatives of the United States in collusion with some leading Puerto Rican politicians, a feat described by many accurately as a monumental hoax. For although these actions resulted in the removal of Puerto Rico from the UN colonial list, Public Law 600 was at best a cosmetic measure. The citizens of Puerto Rico continue to be disenfranchised nationally, unable to vote for president, vice president, or be represented in Congress by voting representatives and senators, and thus have no say regarding the laws that apply to them. And today, of course, all their elections are hijacked so that it can reflect that they want statehood rather than independence, which is an absolute lie if you speak to any Puerto Rican.
Thank you, Ali. I just made a list of, I tried to get a list of the questions that people made at the bottom. So I'm going to, guys, if I'm a bit slow, please bear with me. I tried to read everything so I can type it out. Okay, so I've got a question that says, in case Article 6 fails, what's the backup plan?
I mean, if it fails, there's nothing to say that we can't try to invoke it again. The only time it can fail is within the Security Council if it doesn't go through. I mean, perhaps if France or the UK veto, or if we don't get enough votes. And even then, it's not necessarily a fail on our part. It's actually a win-win solution for us, because now you have a media frenzy on the entire thing. Because like we've mentioned earlier, when we try to invoke Article 6 in the Security Council, we don't just go there and say we want to remove the United States of America. It's a member state that goes there with every single piece of evidence in hand of American persistent violations, meaning that the entire world can now see that the US has persistently violated the principles of the UN Charter. And so if it is a no vote, we can come back the next year and the year after that and the year after that until it is invoked eventually. Because at the end of the day, people are going to start realizing that the US has no place in the United Nations, because they are now seeing exactly what the US has done in declassified information that we're seeing online, and things that a lot of people might not know about, like what Brother Ali was talking about in Puerto Rico. Most people don't know that happened. Most people don't know what happened in Syria and Greece and Italy, and I know that the rest of the panel is going to speak about those violations in a second. So there isn't necessarily something called failing in the invocation of Article 6, because regardless of what we do, there will be the entire world's eyes on the Security Council once it's being invoked in the United Nations, and there is no failing. It's practically a win-win solution.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you know, now, today, when someone says, for example, America is a war criminal, America violates international law or what have you, America is a terrorist state, and so on, this all sounds very radical. It seems to just be radical rhetoric. But when you actually take it to the United Nations and say this, and on and on and on, these are actual violations of the principles of the UN Charter. Now it's not abstract. This isn't rhetoric anymore. And if you look at the actual, another aspect of this is that people will become familiar with the UN Charter, and people might actually become familiar with all of the various documents that constitute international law, and especially in the West. I don't know about elsewhere, but I know that for certainly in the United States, nobody knows anything about international law. The average American citizen has no idea about international law, and that's sort of the dark side of American exceptionalism. In terms of the population, not even understanding that there is a law that's higher than their own state and federal law, and not understanding what their own rights are under international law, so that they themselves aren't even aware of the violations that are committed against them by their own government. So people will become more familiar, and then It's not an abstract rhetorical statement to say that America has committed crimes. It has committed multiple crimes. And again, if you look at the UN Charter, as Brother Ali was talking about, if you look at just Article 2, and most of the sections, at least it's, I think, 1, 4, and 7, if you look at those sections of Article 2, America violates the Article 2 as a matter of policy. That's their entire foreign policy. It has been their entire approach to the world is, by definition, a violation of Article 2 of the UN Charter, because they literally believe that they have the right to interfere with the self-determination of any other country in the world. They believe that they have the right, as you know, and I think that you and I have talked about what they did in South Africa with the Democratic Alliance. They interfered with the domestic political situation in South Africa. Well, that's a violation of international law. That's a violation of the principles of the UN Charter. You're not allowed to do that. It's not just, America has done awful things. They've done things that we don't like. No, these are illegal things. These actually are codified in international law, and in the UN Charter, you're not allowed to do this. So the more that we're able, the closer that we get, just the process of informing people and making people aware of Article 6 and how eligible America is, more than any other member state, how eligible America is for expulsion from the UN, as Sister Iman said, that in and of itself is a victory. And also, as she said, even if we got turned back this year, we'll do it again next year, and we'll do it again the year after that until it gets accomplished, inshallah.
I hear you. When it comes to Palestine and the Palestinians specifically, I don't think that Palestine can afford, or the Palestinians can afford, for what is currently happening for a longer period of time. What is it that we can do right now to assist the Palestinians? Because what is happening in Palestine on a daily basis is a human rights violation, and this is affecting a lot of women, children, men. So how long will this process take, and what can be done immediately or at the moment? Because the Palestinians cannot wait at that long.
Well, I mean, we have to be realistic about what's actually possible for anyone to do. And I think that it's similar to what I was just talking about with regards to every effort made for the invocation of Article 6 is in and of itself a victory. Obviously, the situation for the Palestinians, for the people in Gaza, and increasingly for the people of Lebanon, is urgent. It's an urgent situation. But the more that you invoke, the more that you push for the invocation of Article 6, the more that sends a message to the United States that is a message that is otherwise completely missing from the protest movements, from all of the rally movements, which is the or else. You are always, when you go to a rally and you say, stop the G-side, when you go to a rally and you say from the river to the sea, when you go to a rally and say, Palestine must be free, and what have you, there's no or else, which leaves those in power understanding that you are powerless and you will do nothing and you don't think you can do anything. And it doesn't matter if you go out and you protest and you march and so forth, because all you're doing is letting off steam anyway. And at the end of the day, there's no consequences for them. But if you let them know that we are aware that there are consequences that can be imposed upon you, even if it might take some time, just the awareness that the population is becoming themselves more aware that consequences do exist, and we do have access to mechanisms for imposing consequences on you, that in and of itself can be a deterrent, inshallah, to them continuing to act with impunity and continuing to support the G-side and continuing to support Israel, inshallah.
If you, I had a question now. If you look at what happened with South Africa and how apartheid in South Africa had ended, and the amount of countries that came in and sanctioned South Africa, what is it that's stopping that from happening right now, aside from invoking Article 6? Because I feel like a lot more was done, or maybe it's just based on perception. But why is it that a lot of what was done for South Africa is not being done for Palestine?
Well, I think that, I don't know if anyone else wanted to answer. I think that there's a number of differences. There's a lot of differences. One is that America, like if you look at South Africa specifically, as you said, the situation in South Africa resonated with Americans who felt that they had resolved their segregation issue in the 1950s and 60s, and it was a civil rights movement that they could relate to. Whereas the way that Americans have been raised for generation upon generation is with the idea, based on that slogan, the Zionist slogan, "A land without a people for a people without a land," and an almost sacred duty of protection for the Jews to make sure that a Holocaust wouldn't happen again. The memory of the Holocaust has always been activated for support for Israel, and there's also obviously the fundamental racism on the part of the populations of the West and especially the United States, including their Islamophobia and their dehumanization of the Palestinians. That has generation upon generation has been raised upon that. So I think that there's significant differences historically and contextually between the responses. However, since October 7th, there has been enormous support for Palestine, and there has been tremendous mobilization in terms of boycotts. Like, for example, I'm in Malaysia. You almost can't find a Starbucks that has anyone in it. The boycotts of certain companies that have been targeted is airtight in many countries around the world, and the impact that that's having on many companies is quite dramatic, and it's also quite new. I mean, the BDS movement has been struggling for a very long time to try to bring people on board with this. And I don't think that they've been able to see anything like the kind of success that they've had over the last 9-10 months until now. So you can say that the struggle in support of Palestine is in its early stages in terms of actual grassroots understanding and comprehension of the issues. Because for most of my life, no one has really understood the issue. I think that the situation in South Africa was more easily understandable for people, and there wasn't the same propaganda machine behind support for South Africa that there has been my whole life in support for Zionism and support for Israel. And as I say, there's also the fact that for Americans, it resonated with them because of their own history with segregation and the civil rights movement that they're all very proud of, where they feel that they did the right thing, so-called, and that they resolved that problem. So now anyone else who is doing the thing that we used to do, we want to correct them. So I think there's a difference. Whereas America themselves related, excuse me, have always related with the Zionists as a settler colonial project, because that's what America always was. And also, obviously, America, I mean, it shouldn't go unsaid that America started by means of genocide. So they already have a sympathy for a genocidal colonial project as it is.
My perception of America has always been that America is a result of Hollywood. They've done a very good job in pushing specific propagandas and using Hollywood and mainstream media to push a specific narrative. One of it being that the Jews run the world, that they're the most powerful country globally. How do we ensure that we create a structure on the ground to move away from the current propaganda so that the focus is on promoting Article 9 and the invocation of Article 9?
Article 6.
Article 6. I don't know why I'm thinking of Article 9. Article 6.
That's all right. The only thing that I can think of with regards to that is just what we're doing to try to talk to people, to try to get the message out to more people, and also to expose the fallacies that this is why, for example, I talk about this issue of believing that the Jews run the world and so on, which is a very, very popular narrative among Muslims, by the way. It's not just an American narrative. Many Muslims have also bought into this narrative, and they're still talking about the Rothschilds, even though, you know, Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates have more money between their couch cushions than the Rothschilds family has today. But people still talk about these things, and you find it in the Muslim community globally that still believe these things. And I talk about this because it's simply inaccurate and it's simply untrue. And the only thing that we can do is to just to talk about these things and to expose it. But I think that the most effective thing that we've seen is actually like an app like this one, this platform, which is probably one of the reasons why they want to get rid of it in the United States. Because people are seeing for themselves what's actually going on. They're seeing for themselves an uncontrolled narrative, which isn't a narrative at all, I should say. They're seeing uncontrolled, unfiltered information. Actual factual objective information, eyewitness accounts, scenes from the ground in Gaza. I mean, we have another member of the team, Haya Tamimi, who daily goes online on TikTok and does lives talking to people directly in Gaza, paramedics, journalists, and so on, who are relating in English and in Arabic everything that's going on that day, as well as sharing their own cameras and their own footage. So I think that, as I said, the support that we've seen growing across, especially among younger people, but multiple demographics across the West and everywhere else, is based on people's exposure to real information, and that in and of itself is showing how false the narratives have always been. I mean, I think one of the things that's kind of, for me personally, has sort of done my head in is I was one of those people who always believed that the Israelis or that the Jews or that the Zionists were incredibly adept at propaganda and PR and so on, and they have been incredibly bad at it for the last 9 months, for the last 10 months. They've been it's kind of awesome how bad their propaganda is, how just the repetition of debunked lie after debunked lie. I mean, to the point of the Israeli ambassador to the UN bringing his paper shredder. It's laughable, and you can't go to any any account, any Israeli account on any platform, whether it's X or TikTok or anywhere else, and look in the comments section and not see them being absolutely crucified. So they have really lost control of the narrative. And at the end of the day, in the United States, I don't know about Europe, but in the United States, more than half of the population gets their news from social media, not from mainstream media anymore. So I think that we are well on our way to having these narratives bankrupted, and fewer people are believing in them. And anyway, when you're talking about people that you want to become active and to support, for example, something like the Article 6 campaign, we're not generally talking about Bible Belt Middle Americans who are watching Fox News. We're talking about people who are probably already relatively well informed or becoming more informed, and who are from the younger generation, who do get their news from independent sources and from social media rather than mainstream legacy media that is all controlled narratives.
I think social media has really played a major role, especially after what happened last year, in exposing, like you said, a lot of mainstream media's propaganda. And that's by far the biggest reason why it is that they want to remove TikTok from the United States, because they can't control the narrative anymore. Because everything that they have tried to push, if you look at the news when they spoke about the babies, and they were like, but that's not correct, about what happened to the women, that's not correct. And I remember there was an incident in our parliament where one of the, I'm going to say, white political parties, I think we can all assume who it was, had mentioned that South Africa should be supporting Israel. And why are they not supporting Israel? Based on the news that they've received from your BBC, your Sky News. And at the moment, the minister at the time was Naledi Pandor, and she said, based on what information? Because we also have people on the ground, and this is the facts. And what you have been fed thus far is incorrect. So yeah, it has definitely played a big role in that. What I would, I see Melo's back. I wanted to find out, is there any way that we can bring members of the audience in, open one box and bring people in one by one to ask questions?
While you're trying to do that, I'd like to add on to this Hollywood angle that you are speaking about. And I do understand exactly what it is that you are saying, because especially the incident that you're talking about, I'm fully aware of that. And I also think that it is so indicative of, I'm talking about in a South African context, where a lot of our people actually do just believe something just because somebody said it that is meant to, or they think this person is supposed to know more than them. And it comes from probably, a thing about not wanting to actually know the truth, where it's easier just to read the headline instead of the entire article, don't want to do research. And we also don't want to speak to the right people or different people just because, like I said, the person in front of you saying it looks like they know what they're speaking about. So that just means that they're speaking they're speaking the truth. And luckily for us, because like you mentioned, social media is already showing us that we need to dig deeper. And when it comes to the Article 6 campaign, I also want to tell people not just to listen to us, because right now we might look like we look the right way. So that means we are speaking the right thing. What we're saying is the truth. Go to the source. Go read the Article 6. Go read the United Nations Charter and see why it is that we are saying that it will work. Don't just take our word for it. And that is something that you need to be doing within your life when it comes to news every single day. Because we have an issue where our politicians know that we only want to read the headline. We don't want to read the entire article. So they will feed us things based on certain ways and get away with it because of not digging deeper. So for me, I would say people need to, don't just take our word for it, go and read the United Nations Charter, even if it takes you 2 weeks to get through that entire thing, because it's an important thing. And you will find that you would want our country to act in that manner and not dissolve the United Nations, because the document is a brilliant document. Those principles are good principles that all countries, all member states should actually be adhering to that.
I agree 100%. And just to add on to, sorry. Yes, Ali, you can go?
Yeah, if it's okay. Since you are trying to answer audience questions, I'm just going to respond to a comment that's come up a few times, where we're asked why we focus on Palestine when there's a lot going on in Africa. We do actually focus on everything. The only reason Gaza is taking focus is because the action we're trying to take is a legal action. There is a clear paper trail that shows America supporting Israel, using its veto power to allow a genocide to happen. Whereas a lot of what's happening in Africa is convoluted. It's harder to follow the legal paper trail so that we can pursue that. So that's the only reason there's a little bit of focus on Gaza. Actually, Brother Aryan has prepared a list of violations that took place in the DRC in Congo. If you allow him to speak, and we can go into that.
Well, sorry, but not to mention, we're not focusing exclusively on Gaza. We're not focusing exclusively on Palestine. We're talking about the United States' persistent violations for the last 8 decades. The impetus for it, the impetus for the campaign was the genocide in Gaza, yes. And the questions that we're answering are largely about Palestine and about Gaza. But what we're talking about is American impunity, American global domination, American brutality and savagery, and the continuous fostering of conflicts around the world for their own profit benefit, which is not just even conflicts, but interfering with the self-determination and the domestic political situation in country after country after country. So no, we're not just focusing on Gaza. We're not just focusing on Palestine, but also, by the way, the situation in Gaza is absolutely horrific. And it is absolutely urgent. And it is something that has been going on for 8 decades. For even longer than that, actually, if we're telling the truth. The Zionist genocide, or G-side, G-side in Gaza has been going on since at least the 1880s. So this is a very long public G-side colonial occupation that does need to be discussed, and it does need to be talked about. But no, when we're talking about invoking Article 6, it's not only because of the situation in Gaza. It's not only because of the situation in Palestine. It's because of the persistent, consistent, and insistent violations by the United States of the principles of the UN Charter.
100%. And just to add to that, when you look at the US has played a major role in destabilizing a lot of countries across the African continent. So invoking Article 6 will not only benefit Palestine, but your countries like Congo, Sudan. So it's not just Palestine. I looked into invoking Article 6. I understand a lot of what has happened over a specific period of time when you look at the history of the US. So I think that is why this is such a vital conversation, and also to put emphasis on why signing the petition is important. The focus is not necessarily, and yes, Palestine is a big, I'm going to say, catalyst to this, and Mr. Bolton can always come in and correct me, but invoking that will affect a lot of countries that has been affected in a very negative way by the United States. So that is what I took from it, and hence I wanted to have this conversation, because I felt like it's an important conversation, and it's an important conversation that those that are pro-Palestinian, but more importantly, and I said it at the beginning of this live, you are a humanitarian. You are for human beings, because at the end of the day, it's not about one specific race, but the human race in general. And the United States has really not cared about what race you are. It's purely about how much they can capitalize from that region and that people. So that's very important that we understand. Aryan, I think that Arya had mentioned that you had a few pointers that you wanted to make.
Yeah, it was regarding the U.S. violations in DRC. I mean, they played a key role in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. You know, for those of our brothers and sisters that don't know who Patrice Lumumba was, in the comments, so Patrice Lumumba was a Congolese independence leader and the first democratically elected prime minister of the DRC. After it gained independence from Belgium in 1960s. He was a very significant figure in the fight against colonialism in Africa. So he founded the Movement National Congolais and advocated for a united Congo free from European control. Lumumba's vision for Congo was based on national unity and economic independence, which challenged the interests of Belgium and other Western powers at the time, like France and obviously the US, that sought to maintain influence over the resource-rich nation post-independence. So they granted the DRC its independence only to try and keep control over it still, you see. But Lumumba's tenure as prime minister was unfortunately short-lived because of external interference from the US and Belgium. At the time, he'd faced separatist challenges from separatists that the US and Belgium actually helped form in DRC. And in 1961, he was captured, tortured, and assassinated with involvement from Belgian authorities and the CIA, right? His death, therefore, has sort of made him a martyr for Pan-Africanism, and he still remains, till this day, a symbol of African resistance to colonialism and Western imperialism. So exactly what the United States did regarding his assassination is, first off, they went to the DRC and used communism as a scare tactic to maintain control during the Cold War. So circa like 1950s and early 1960s, so the US was kind of deeply entrenched in the Cold War, seeking to counter the Soviet influence across the globe. And Africa at the time was seen as the sort of crucial battleground because of its strategic importance and the natural resources that we had. Though Lumumba himself said he was not a communist, his national stance and efforts to reach out towards the Soviet Union for assistance during Congo's early crisis sort of alarmed Washington at the era. They also harvested Congolese minerals. They plotted via the use of the CIA to depose Patrice. Let me get this guy's name correct. It was Alan Dulles, the director of the CIA at the time, actually came out and said, look, guys, we see Lumumba as a dangerous figure, quote unquote. So in 1960, he authorized the CIA operation to remove Lumumba from power, viewing him as a threat to U.S. interests. Mind you, this is not the actual threat that, this wasn't the actual assassination. This is one of the many assassination attempts at Lumumba at the time. What this particular one that I'm talking about was a plot to try and poison Lumumba. They actually even sent a CIA operative to Congo for that specific purpose, but that plan was foiled. The US also, like I said before, supported anti-Lumumba factions, the separatists I was talking about earlier. They funded these rival factions. They also aided and abetted Lumumba's capture and assassination by pointing out where he was fleeing to. And once they got rid of Lumumba, they then supported an oppressive regime after his takedown for their own interests. Now, how do we know that they indeed actually did this, and this is not just some wild, wacko conspiracy theory that we just came up with? You have the Foreign Relations of the United States series document that was declassified, I think in the year 2000, titled Congo 1960 to 1968, which details a lot of what U.S. policy pertained to during the Congo crisis. And then we have the CIA's covert operation files, again declassified in the year 2000. And then we have the Church Committee report that came out in 1975, in which the U.S. Senate Select Committee itself tried to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities. And this is where we discovered that, yes, indeed, CIA did have a direct assassination plot. Then we have a memo from CIA officer Lawrence Devlin at the time, in this memo himself. So this person was a key figure in overseeing the U.S. covert operations in Congo. In these now declassified memos, Devlin communicated with the CIA headquarters in Washington about Lumumba's movements and the situation on the ground himself. So this is how they knew where Lumumba was and where to send the separatist factions. How are these exactly violations? So this one, according to the UN Charter, specifically a clause, Article 2.4, prohibits the use of force against territorial integrity or political independence of any state. And I'm quoting the exact article itself. All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against territorial integrity or political independence of any state. As I've mentioned before, the admitted U.S.'s involvement in a coup and an assassination plot against DRC's then leader violates this particular article. Then there's also a prohibition on interference in domestic affairs. You know, there's Article 2.7 of the UN Charter, which I'm going to quote again. Nothing contained in the present charter shall authorize the UN to intervene in matters which are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of any state. And now, as I also mentioned before, the US went ahead and supported the separatist movements inside DRC by not only monetary persuasion, but they also went and gave Lumumba's exact location, which helped the separatist movements overthrow the government. Obviously, this is another violation of that article. So just in the interest of time, I think I'm just going to stop at these two particular violations. There's a lot more that we can display, but I'd like to give the other speakers some more time to speak.
I mean, if I may, like I said, the article that Brother Ariane was referring to is Article 2, and as I mentioned, America violates Article 2 as a matter of policy. if you look at the entire Cold War period, so-called Cold War period, from the time of the establishment of the United Nations, the whole premise of the Cold War period was the fight against communism, which was to determine, in other words, the United States wanted to be able to determine what kind of a government any given country would have, whether it was Vietnam or Indonesia or the Philippines or even Italy, or even their so-called allies in Europe. They wanted to be able to determine what kind of a government any country would have. And they still want to determine that until today. We've seen, it may be controversial, but if you have followed America's modus operandi, then you would recognize that even what just happened in Bangladesh was a covert operation by the United States, a color revolution against the government of Sheikh Hasina. And as I mentioned before, and I've talked about it a number of times, and I've had the honor of being on panel discussions with Dr. Alan Bosek, talking about the situation in South Africa with the Democratic Alliance and so on. Even the fact that they have an organization called the National Endowment for Democracy, which is nothing but a front organization for the CIA, specifically for the purpose of fostering regime change in country after country after country. Just the fact that they have an organization like that, that can go into foreign countries, that can go into countries all around the world to foster opposition groups and support opposition groups so that they can try to get their parties, the parties that they sponsor, the parties that they support and that they fund, so that they can get those into power in this country or that country. This in and of itself constitutes a violation of Article 2 of the UN Charter. They violate it as a matter of policy. This is their entire approach to foreign relations, is to try to interfere with the domestic political situation and political determination of any country. They believe that this is their right, and this is what they have been doing. And the only thing, this is the really important point here. It's not that they just have the power to do that, and so they do it. What gives them the power to do it is the impunity and unaccountability that they're able to enjoy when they do those things, and they're only able to enjoy that impunity because they dominate the United Nations. I've seen people in the comment section expressing very familiar, very common skepticism and pessimism, saying things like international law is a joke. Well, that's what they have made you think. They taught you that lesson because they have been able to act above the law. They've been able to act with impunity for, again, nearly 8 decades. And the only reason that they've been able to do that isn't because they're that powerful. It's because they have been able to control the only international body that is charged with the enforcement of international law. It's just like in those old cowboy movies, those old Western movies, where you have an outlaw who comes into a town and becomes the sheriff. And he's still an outlaw, but he has the tin badge, so he gets to do whatever he wants. And then that makes a mockery of the law. Well, that's what the United States has been able to do, and the tin badge that they have is represented by their position on the Security Council. It's represented by their funding and their domination of the United Nations. So if you can expel America from the United Nations, well, you'll knock that tin badge off of their chest, and they won't have the impunity and the unaccountability that they have enjoyed for 8 decades. And it will be a completely different power dynamic in the world. Because America simply doesn't have the power that they used to have. That's a fact. They don't have the power that they had when the United Nations was first established. And now, at this point, they desperately need the United Nations. And I'll give you an example of why you can understand that that's true. Because of what Sister Iman said earlier. I think she said that they have invoked the veto power something like 14 times. Is that right, Sister? Just in the last couple of years?
in the last 2 years.
In the last 2
14
years.
times, yes.
14 times. Well, what does that tell you? That tells you that they're losing control of the rest of the world. They have invoked the veto power 14 times in 2 years because they have had to. Because that means that they are getting further and further and further away from the global consensus. That the rest of the world is turning away from them. And that the only thing that they can do to try to maintain their power and to maintain their control and maintain their ability to dominate is by invoking the veto power. Because everybody is turning against them. So they're actually losing their power. They're losing their ability to coerce by other means. So increasingly, the United Nations is important to them. And also, we were talking earlier about the fact that they had withheld their funding up until it was necessary for them to veto a ceasefire. And then suddenly they came up with the funds and paid the United Nations what they owed them so that they could veto the ceasefire. Excuse me. So we see that international law isn't a joke. If international law was a joke, then America wouldn't need to find some mechanism for giving them impunity and unaccountability to international law. The same goes for the United Nations itself. If the United Nations was a useless or impotent or unimportant or powerless institution, then America would have no interest in controlling it. But the very fact that they've been able to control it is exactly what has allowed and enabled them to magnify and amplify and exaggerate their power. And without their control of the United Nations, they won't have that power anymore, because their power comes from their unaccountability.
Everything you said was absolutely brilliant, Brother Shahid, as usual. And I do want to segue into the persistent violations of the United Nations against their own people. Because a lot of the times when we do talk about American violations of international law, and I'm not talking about us as middle nation, I'm talking about people around the world, we always tend to talk about American violations of international law internationally, but no one really talks about what they're doing to their own people and the way that they're causing their own people to suffer by violating international law. And I think it's really important to mention that the US tries to evade international law through their own domestic laws, which is something that we don't see from any other country. We only ever see it from the United States. I mean, if you look at the ICC, for example, the International Criminal Court, we see that America, they created their own law that says if any of their civilians, any of their citizens, or the citizens of their allies are taken to the ICC, they have their own law, domestic law, that says that they can go in fully armed and extract that person from the ICC. That is a domestic American law. That is not a law that is implemented around the entire world. But you can see how they genuinely do believe that whatever they say goes. And that is something that we need to get rid of. That is the hegemony and the exceptionalism we're talking about. But when we talk about American domestic violations, it supersedes this just political sense of it. We're talking about literal lives that are being taken on a daily basis. I mean, the government is supposed to be a body that safeguards their people, right? However, we're seeing numbers coming out of the United States of America that are very, very similar to war zones across the entire world. And when we're talking about war zones, I mean every single conflict globally combined. Those are the numbers coming out of the United States of America. So, and I want to give you a few statistics for you to actually process all of this entire information. I mean, 117 people are murdered on average every single day in the United States of America just through gun violence. Do you get this? On average, in Indonesia, a country with a very similar population, almost 300 million as well, 2 people are murdered every day in 2022. 2 people who are hit by cars, stabbed to death, beat to death, killed by a weapon, right? 2 people killed in every way, shape, and form. But in the United States of America, on a daily basis, it's 117, right? In Indonesia, in an entire year, in 2022, 832 people were murdered. But in the USA, it's 117 in a single day. That's about 7 times the amount of people being killed, right? In 1 week, the amount of people killed in Indonesia in a year can be killed in the United States of America in a day, right? So if we look at an even bigger number, it's the fact that around 40,000 Americans were killed by gun violence last year in the United States of America. 40,000. The comparison between 40,000 and then 800 is absolutely insane. So the government is failing to safeguard their civilians. They're failing to safeguard children who are in schools. Last year, 650 mass shootings occurred. And that includes mass shootings in schools where there are children, right? The government still will not stop all of these laws about owning guns and everything. I think it's about 100 guns per person in the United States of America. I think it's there are 100 times the amount of guns than there are people in the United States of America. And then instead of just looking at the fact that 117 people are murdered every single day, let's compare it to global conflicts. If you count every single child who is either injured or killed every single day in every single conflict combined worldwide before the genocide began in Gaza, it's 27. If you look at that number in the United States alone, which makes up 3% of the entire population, we know that it's 23 children either injured or killed on average just by gun violence. Do you hear me? I'm saying that every single conflict worldwide combined is comparable to the United States of America. Okay, let's forget all of this, that the US government is not safeguarding their people. Let's talk about the fact that they are killing their own people. Let's talk about the police of the United States of America, the security forces of the United States of America, who have killed 1,163 people in 2023. And of course, the majority of these people killed are people of color. 70% of the people killed were people of color, even though they only make up 30% of the entire population. This means it comes with an agenda. It comes with a motive of killing people of color. These police forces are doing this on purpose. They are attacking people of color on purpose. It's very clear that they have an agenda. This is domestic terrorism. And when we see the fact that they are killing 3 American people every single day on average in 2023, under Joe Biden's administration, we know that this is a domestic military, because even their own military didn't have this many casualties when they invaded Iraq. More Americans are killed every single year in the United States of America than American soldiers killed in a literal war zone. So we also can look at the fact that 25% of absolutely every single person incarcerated in the entire world is in the United States of America, even though they only make up 3% of the population. And of course, again, it's disproportionately people of color. And these prisoners who are in there are being forced to do unpaid manual labor. And that's just a fancy way of saying slavery, because these people are unpaid. They literally have chains on them because they are arrested. They have the handcuffs on their hands whenever they're in the halls or anything. They're not allowed to leave their cages, and yet they still have to do manual labor. And a lot of these people are in there for life. This is quite literally slavery. And all of these things that I have mentioned today, every single thing, the fact that these police officers who are supposed to be safeguarding the people are the ones killing the people, and the fact that a lot of them are not even going on trial, they just have to hand in their gun and badge and they're suspended. A lot of them, when they do go on trial, they are found not guilty. It means that the entire system is corrupt. These people are violating international law, violating the principles of the United Nations Charter, violating the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination. And within the prison system, they are violating the Geneva Conventions, but you can't say that they are, because it's not necessarily a war. So you can't say that they're violating the Geneva Convention, but they are. And that's the thing about the United States of America. It is a war zone. It is quite literally a war zone on the grounds over there. The people are not perceiving it as so. They say this is the land of the free. You are not free. You are not free in any way, shape, or form. We are comparing the US to absolutely every single conflict in the entire world combined. So we know that these police officers who are killing people on a daily basis, 3 people every single day, they need to be tried as war criminals. They need to be tried in the ICC. We know that the entire system is corrupt. The entire system is built to make more money and more power for the powerful. It is a megalomaniac society. It is not made for the poor people. It is not made for the people of color, right? And this entire society can be fixed. It has the ability to be fixed. The entire government can be fixed. And this is why we want to invoke Article 6. Because not only is the US violating international law internationally, they're violating it within their own country. So when you put these sanctions on this government, when you put these sanctions on this member state, who is no longer going to be a member state, they can ask the question, oh, why are you doing this to us? Well, if you fix your ways, then you won't have these economic sanctions being put on you. Your economy won't suffer. Your rich people won't suffer. Your powerful won't suffer, right? But until they decide to make that change, to help their people, to be a good government to their people, to instead of bullying their own people, instead of being that rowdy child in the classroom who hits people and then says, oh, my father is the one who actually pays for this entire school, so if you kick me out, you're not, my father's going to pull his funding, which is something that we talk about in the US. Oh, the US pulls their funding, the entire UN will collapse. The school won't collapse if that student who is bullying everyone and never gets in trouble, if his dad pulls the funding, because then the school won't have to keep focusing on this child, right? It's the same thing with the United Nations. It won't have to keep focusing on the US violations in the entire world, and especially domestically, which is something that nobody ever talks about. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Iman. Can you elaborate further, Brother Ali, regarding how the American people is going to benefit from Article 6?
Yeah, I'm just trying to. Whew, Sister Iman was cooking.
There was a lot of moments I was like, wow.
Yeah. So I'm sure a lot of Americans are asking themselves, what is going to happen to me? And I mean, this is a moral question. In the heart of it, America's membership in the UN is a contract. They have responsibilities and promises and laws and obligations that they have to adhere to. So Americans should ask themselves those moral questions. Do you believe that contracts should be upheld and that rules and laws should be adhered to? Do you believe in accountability from wrongdoings? If the answer to these questions is yes, then Americans should absolutely support invoking Article 6. And the impact on them personally should be second to that morality. And when it comes to all these violations Sister Iman just went through, I mean, you cannot very much go and invoke your constitution or look for that system that is holding you down to lift you back up. It's just never going to work. There's been instances of people getting held in contempt for court for trying to invoke their constitutional rights in court. So it's just completely out of hand there. So you do need another layer of law that can help you through this. So that cop that just shot someone, instead of just getting a slap on the wrist or worst case scenario, getting let go of the force, he can be held on trial at The Hague with his supervisor and really answer to what he did and find a system that can hold them accountable. But that's as far as it will be a freeing experience for Americans to see international law finally come and take care of them. I mean, if the violations of the governments of the U.S. was done elsewhere, the U.S. will condemn that country and attack them. Somebody in the comment actually said that, and it made me giggle because that is a talking point that we do go to. If you actually look at American politics itself, there is a huge sector or a section of people in America, especially to the right, who do believe that America shouldn't be in the United Nations. They're not big believers of multilateralism. They believe in American exceptionalism and unilateralism. They don't like the idea of being held accountable to any foreign power. So they would prefer America out of the UN for their own reasons. But let's go to financially. How would America be harmed financially by that? Of course, there is going to be a financial impact because America makes most its money via the MIC, the military-industrial complex. And that requires America to continue fanning the flame of conflict in perpetuity throughout the world. So without that income, this is going to harm the economy of the U.S. But honestly, this is coming regardless of what happens because the shift of wealth to the global south is trending right now. It is moving in that direction. So that brings us to the last thing that people worry about is would America go rogue if this works out? If invoking Article 6 happens and they are thrown out, are they going to go all-out war against the world? I mean, maybe, but it would be quite a stupid move. The thing is, America isn't just holding the UN hostage. It also fosters its power globally via the UN, whether it's its NATO ties. You have 170 United States bases all around the world. So with it not being in the UN, all these ties will come into questions. All these loyalties will come into question. So the countries that are in bed with America, I don't want to say in bed, that have been held down by American policies, will have to rethink all that. And once we sanction America, that mechanism that they had via the UN to dominate the world won't be available anymore. And the rest of the world can hold America accountable and keep them at bay. I mean, America can't go against the entire world at once. So the idea of America going rogue is highly unlikely.
Well,
Thank you, Brother Ali.
Let me just say something,
Sorry.
Sister Mellower. I mean, Brother Ali sort of covered it, but the idea of America going rogue, they've been going rogue for 8 decades, and the reason they've been able to do that is because of their domination of the United Nations. That's the thing that has enabled them and allowed them to do it. So if they get expelled from the United Nations and they don't have the power to overrule the global consensus, and if they themselves become subject to, as Sister Iman said, for example, economic sanctions for their persistent, consistent, and insistent violations of international law, their insistent and persistent and consistent violations of the principles of the UN Charter, and they face consequences for that, well, you can expect that their behavior will change, because that's the only thing that ever can change behavior is accountability. And the only reason that they've been able to do what they've been able to do and create the kind of a world that we've all been suffering in and that we've all gotten used to, and I can see it in the comments also, the pessimism and the cynicism that people have, these are all lessons that America taught you by their domination of the United Nations and their ability to act above the law. That's what has enabled people, that is what has caused people to have this kind of pessimism and this kind of cynicism about international institutions, about international law, about even the principles of the rule of law, because every time America says it, it's a joke. Every time America talks about international law or rules-based order or whatever, we all know what that means. They injected hypocrisy and double standards in the United Nations from day one. But that doesn't mean that that institution has to operate that way. It has operated that way because of American domination. And once you resolve that problem and you remove that corrupting influence and that corrupting force from the United Nations, then you will see a completely different approach to the world. Because just look at the General Assembly. They're always able to reach a consensus on every issue, on any issue. All the other nations of the world don't have a problem getting along with each other. All the other nations in the world don't have a problem discussing things in a civil and decent, polite manner, in a respectable manner, and coming to resolutions and resolving conflicts and so forth. I mean, just look at BRICS. BRICS, these are member states, but between them you have Saudi Arabia and Iran, which have always been perceived to be arch enemies, but they were able to join together in BRICS, and prior to joining BRICS anyway, even prior to joining BRICS, they already had a rapprochement between them and trying to resolve their conflicts with each other. All of the nations of the world know how to deal with each other in a harmonious manner. The problem is a very obvious and easily identifiable problem, and that's the United States. So if we expel the U.S. from the UN, there's no chance for them to go rogue, because the only thing that has enabled them to go rogue for 8 decades has been their domination of the UN to ensure that they can act without any accountability.
100%. I think also just to add to, there's a lot of Americans in the comment section, and I mentioned this when we started the conversation, that when we speak about America, it is America as a state. It is America as they govern, not the American people. Will you be affected? I think some of the panelists can elaborate and discuss that, but we cannot ignore the human rights violation that has been done by America as a state through the military, and how it is that it has affected human lives. And that is the part where we need to set aside our own personal feelings or our loyalty towards a specific country and its governance and dominance when it comes at the expense of human lives. That's not possible. So if you are American, I think you need to do a bit of introspection in terms of what part do I want to play in liberating the world, in liberating the oppression that has been imposed by America as a country, not as you as an individual.
Yeah, you know, and I would just say, because I myself am an American, and I was raised to believe that it was an American value that when you give your word, you mean it, and that when you make a pledge, you keep it. When you make a promise, you keep it. When you sign on to some rules, you follow those rules. Those are supposed to be allegedly American values. So for American citizens, do you believe in that or not? Or has America's domination of the United Nations so thoroughly corrupted your belief in any kind of principles or any kind of values that you don't think that that actually is supposed to apply? That people are that when you give your word, it's meaningless. That when you sign a contract, it's meaningless. That they don't treat you that way, by the way. When you sign a contract, you are kept to it. When you sign any kind of a promise or any kind of an agreement or what have you, they hold you to it. And I've talked about this before. And just as what Sister Iman was talking about. It's in your interest as an American citizen to sign the petition. It's in your interest, actually, to see the United States expelled from the United Nations because your country is oppressing you. The situation they've normalized for you is absolutely atrocious, and it's unbelievable that they have normalized it for you. Over 650 mass shootings in the United States last year, over 1,000 extrajudicial killings by the police, by the security forces in the United States last year, and on a regular basis. And the only redress that you have for that is to go through the same criminal justice system that gave that police officer a gun in the first place to shoot so-called minority communities, which are nothing but members of the global majority, to go after those communities in the first place. You're going to go to a judge and have that single police officer tried by a jury of his peers, and maybe they'll decide that it was a justified shooting, because of course they will. When what's supposed to happen is that police officer himself, his captain, his supervisor, the chief of police, the commissioner of police, the mayor, the city council, all of them are part of an entire system that systematically does target so-called minority communities. That's just a fact. You can't look at the numbers of police shootings, police killings. I'm sorry to use these words. I know you're not supposed to use these words on TikTok, but these extrajudicial shootings by the police. And then if you combine that with the figures on mass incarceration, as Sister Iman said, the United States only accounts for about 3% of the whole global population, but 25% of every single person on earth who's in prison is in prison in the United States, and overwhelmingly people of color. You can't tell me that's not systematic. And if you had access to international law, if you had access to the bodies that enforce international law, which you don't, and the reason why you don't is because of America's domination of the United Nations. But if you had access to those institutions, well, you might be able to get justice, and that situation in your country might change. You can't tell me, if you're honest as an American citizen, that you're living in paradise. You know perfectly well what the situation is like in the United States. You know perfectly well that your social security number and your credit record is around your neck like an iron collar, and every American citizen is being hounded like an escaped convict by debt collectors. You know perfectly well that you don't have the freedom that you are always told that you have. You know that, for example, even your data, your personal data, is being taken from you. It's being collected without your permission, and it's being sold off. Well, by the way, that's against international law. But of course, you don't know that, because they want you to think that the only redress for your grievances is to go to the people who are violating your rights. The only people that you can go to complain about your rights being violated are the very people and the very system that's violating your rights. Well, you should support the expulsion of the United States from the United Nations so that you could actually appeal to higher authority to have your rights actually secured for you. And in this whole process of supporting Article 6 and listening to all of the speakers on this panel, and every time that we do a live and all of the information that we're trying to put out there, you can actually learn what your rights are. Because you think that your rights are whatever your government tells you. But your government actually is just another country on the face of the earth. It's just another country in the world. And they are as subject to international law as everyone else, or they're supposed to be. But when they're able to act with impunity, when they're able to act with unaccountability all around the world, well, you best believe that they also act that same way against you in your own country. The same way that they act around the world, they act with you yourself. If you pound your chest and are very proud of American exceptionalism, well, you're not the beneficiary of that. The powerful are the beneficiary of that. You're the victim of that, because they want you to not know and to not understand that you actually should have recourse to international bodies that are charged with the enforcement of international law, because your government is violating international law against you on a daily basis. So it's not even about being anti-American at all. This is pro-American. This is pro-innocent people. This is pro all the civilian populations of the world. And you're not any different from the countries and the people of the world that America is violating their rights abroad. They're doing the same thing to you. And they look at you the same way, especially if you're a so-called person of color, if you're from a member of the global majority. Well, they'll treat you the same way in America as they'll treat you if you're in Africa, or if you're in Asia, or if you're in Latin America. They see you exactly the same way if you're over there or if you're in the States. They treat you the same way, they look at you the same way, and they're just as dismissive of your rights, and they don't look at you as a citizen. So you should understand that it is absolutely in your interest. And if you want to see your country improve and actually adhere to international law, which is another way of saying give you your rights that they're telling you, that they promise you that you already have, even though you know perfectly well you don't. If you expel the U.S. from the UN, then you have an actual chance to maybe live in a society that resembles the one that they're trying to tell you and trying to convince you that you already live in.
100%.
If I may, just 1 second. It's been asked a lot in the comments. I just want to be... what we're doing is asking for people to sign the petition that we have to invoke Article 6. You will find the link in most of the speakers' bios. Just go in there and sign that petition. At the end, it's going to ask you to donate $3. That money does not go to us. It goes to change.org. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money, but we're not asking for any monetary compensation. But please do confirm your email for that to count. One little interesting thing when it comes to America's use of law, it actually uses its Congress and the UN to subvert one another. I mean, at one point, their Congress passed a law to cap their spending in the UN at 25%, while at the same time, they've used international bodies to declare war without congressional approval. So they use one against the other just to get their way no matter what.
Thank you. Nanda, did you have something to say?
No, Ali covered everything that I wanted to say, because I've seen a lot of people were asking about the petition on how to sign this petition. So Ali has covered it. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, Brother Ali. If you can't find the link, it's just easy. You can just Google and find invoke Article 6 on change.org. So it's there. It's easy. Alternatively, you can follow Middle Nation YouTube channel. There are many links under the description. You can also see the petition link over there. And also follow the Middle Nation channel to get more about geopolitics regarding Brother Shahid Bolson. If you think that we haven't been, no country is talking about the violations about America, lately on the 16th of September, China has a representative at the UN has spoken and made a comment. I will read you in the comment that he was saying that. But why has it been unable to stop this human tragedy, the worst of its kind to this day? As the analysis point out, had the United States not stood in the way on all those occasions, the Council could have adopted a resolution demanding a ceasefire early on after the conflict erupted. Had the United States not shielded one side time and again, multiple resolutions of this Council would not have been flagrantly rejected and defied. So they have been seeing this many times as well. This is China. So there are 4 other permanent members. So this is doable because the atrocity is becoming worse and worse. So I encourage everyone to sign the petition and share. The most important one is share, so that we can bring this to another step, so that we can bring this to our leaders. Or you can, if you have more burning questions, please join our daily TikTok lives. South Africa time at 7 p.m. Every day, or on Space. I'm not too sure, but you can follow us on X and see the proper timing of our discussions on Space. Sister Nisa, would you like to summarize? I think we have come to the end of the question that you wanted to present. Sister Nisa, could you please summarize?
Yes, thank you for that. So I'd just like to, especially for those that joined afterwards, at the beginning we spoke about the steps to invoke Article 6. Firstly, it will take some time. We don't have a deadline, hard and fast date that it's going to happen, and it all depends on you signing the petition and helping us by signing and sharing. So the sooner we reach our goal of 100,000 signatures, we can move on to the next step, which would be to approach member states at the United Nations, and which would be those that were particularly affected by the actions of the United States of America. And once we've done that, we will submit the petition with the legal evidences, that some of which we presented now. Brother Ali presented, Sister Ima presented, Brother Rian presented, some of the violations that America is guilty of, we will submit that with a petition to the United Nations in front of the Security Council, who will then vote on the matter. And if the majority supports it, the recommendation will go to the General Assembly. And then the final step would be at the General Assembly, a vote will be taken, and in order to invoke Article 6, to expel America from the United Nations, we need a 2/3 majority in favor of the motion. And the results of of expelling the United States of America from the organization would lead to global peace and security. It would lead for respect for international law, and it would lead to every other member state being equal, where the world would be able to operate as effectively for its own citizens. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Nisa. I just wanted to ask, thus far, do you have any legal and diplomatic support in terms when it comes to the campaign from any other United Nations members thus far?
I think Brother Shahid would have the answer to that. He'd be able to take this one.
Well, we haven't actually elevated the campaign to that level yet, though we do have, I have contacts in various political parties, both in South Africa and in a number of other places. I also have had people from inside the United Nations contact me to actually thank us for the campaign and to encourage us to push harder. But we're focusing right now on the petition and trying to grow the grassroots support, because at the end of the day, it's a bold move to expect any state to undertake it. It is a bold move. Although it's not, by definition, it's not a radical move at all. All we're asking is for the implementation of the UN Charter itself. We're not asking for any change to the United Nations. We're not asking for any radical step to be taken. We're just asking for the implementation of the UN Charter to the United States. It shouldn't be a radical move. But realistically speaking, it will require a great deal of confidence for any member state to take this on. So this is why we're focusing on the global petition right now, to try to build grassroots support and a way to show and to evidence that there is global grassroots support for this step. And at that point, we will elevate it to the political and diplomatic level, inshallah.
You know, it's actually, when you think about it, it is actually not a radical move, realistically speaking, and in theory. If provision has been made for this article to be invoked, then clearly it can be done. It's amazing how America, of all the countries, however, has appointed itself as the custodian to human rights when they continuously have violated human rights. And I think this is also where, when you look at a lot of the questions that comes from America, is that a lot of Americans don't even know that international law is outside of American law. It's not American law. And it just shows you to which extent they have violated international law for you to assume that international law is American law. It's very interesting. But please sign the petition, guys, please.
They also have a thing. I had a comment from someone on one of the videos about Article 6, who was saying that that something to the effect of the American Constitution supersedes international law for the United States. That's not the case. When you became a member of the United Nations, and when you signed on to the international treaties and obligations that you signed on to, international law became the law of the land. The Constitution and all of your system of laws is subordinate to international law. You are required to adhere to international law. But this is the American exceptionalism. And as I say, the American exceptionalism is a kind of a trick for the population, something that they want to be proud of. It's kind of like when you have a sports team that wins, and you like to pretend that we won when the sports team wins, when you actually got nothing out of it whatsoever. But Americans like to be proud of American exceptionalism, even though they themselves are the victims of American exceptionalism. I mean, if you think about this goes back to, again, why Americans should actually support it. America's impunity and unaccountability, which has enabled them and allowed them to foster conflicts all around the world and to interfere in governments all around the world, interfere in country after country after country. They don't do that for free. They do that with your money. They do that with billions and billions of dollars of your tax money that's not going to your infrastructure, that's not going to your health care, that's not going to your schools, that's not going to your children, that's not going to anything that helps you at all. All of that money is going to help the so-called elite, the owners and controllers of global financialized capital who live in the United States. All of that money is not beneficial to you in any way, except that it's making the rest of the world hate you. So if you're concerned about anti-Americanism, then the best thing you could do is get America out of the United Nations so that they could stop acting so hostilely, in such a hostile manner to the rest of the world, and causing such antagonism in the rest of the world towards the United States, as well as I say, your tax money will maybe actually start going to benefit you, rather than going to just benefit the military-industrial complex, and fostering conflicts all over the world and causing the people of the world to blame you for all of the blood that your country is shedding.
Is there anyone that would like, someone is asking, is this, no, it's not for Americans only. It's literally a global petition. Anyone from anywhere in the world should sign the petition. That's just my take on that. There's a specific comment that has been going through, I don't know if it's one person, in terms of the funding, and this was addressed at the beginning of the live, but if someone can maybe just come in and clear up the misconception when it comes to American funding, because someone actually commented and said this can't be possible because the United Nations is funded by the US, because we always assume that they are fully funded by the US and hence they have this power to control the world.
Absolutely, yes, it is a common misconception, and it also speaks a lot about mindset with regards to as long as you have money, it means you can get away with stuff. But it also goes back to the narratives that they speak. What we mentioned earlier in the live with regards to the funding is that based on the United States of America's GDP, they are meant to contribute 27% of the peacekeeping budget. But because they passed a law in, I think, 1993 or 1994, but it's been 3 decades, where the Congress passed a law that caps their contribution at 25%. So they are already not up to date with their payments. They've been short paying when they do, or if they do make payments. And their current contribution, their physical contribution is about 22% per year, but they're also not paying that on time. Like was mentioned earlier, in January of this year, when they needed to cease fire resolution on behalf of Israel, they needed to make their payment quickly because they would not have been allowed to veto or vote on behalf of Israel to shield Israel when it came to the ceasefire. So they made their payment quickly, showing and demonstrating how they use narrative to prop them up as the most powerful nation on earth. We mentioned the Hollywood factor, by spreading narratives about themselves that they also eventually believe about themselves. But at the end of the day, they are in arrears, they're short paying, they're not paying, and when they do pay, it is to do things such as vetoing ceasefire resolutions in G-sides against people that are currently being brutalized by the arm of who they are, the colonizing arm. So that is what they do with the funding. They are not the number one contributor.
Isa, I just have a question. When it comes to, I know that you mentioned that they need to get a 2/3 majority when they vote in the UN Assembly. Am I correct in saying that?
The General Assembly, yes.
General Assembly, yes. So I remember when they voted, the General Assembly voted the first time where it was, I think it was for Palestine to be recognized as a state. They got about 143, which is a 2/3 majority. And then recently it was the vote for Israel to evacuate the Palestinian occupation, right? and they got about 123, which, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know what the calculation is, if that is a 2/3 majority. But based on those numbers, I don't think it is impossible, if that is how the members of the UN have voted thus far. The most important thing is to do what is required of us as citizens globally that believe in human rights and everyone having an equal say in partaking in this so-called international law. So please sign the petition. But yes, you sit at the, okay, so that is, I've given, that's.
You are actually 100% correct when you say that. And it does come back to the fact that global consensus is important when it comes to the United Nations, narratives are changing, things are changing. The United States of America is being isolated currently from the rest of the world. So you will see even some of their allies are not even going with the flow anymore when it comes to them. So that is what we are witnessing right now. A lot of the alliances are moving towards the global south, moving towards the BRICS nations, and the United Nations is an important part when it comes to the BRICS nations as well. So, an important organization. But it is mainly based on global consensus, where America previously used to go against the global consensus, but now we are seeing where they are being pressured to act equally with the rest of the world.
Yeah, this is actually a very important question. Someone said that if the US is kicked out of the UN, wouldn't they no longer be under international law? Is that true? Do you need to be ratified to the United Nations in order for you to comply to international law?
No, you don't have to. Law is law. You need to stick to the law. The problem with the United Nations and America is that America is using the organization to act with impunity. And with us removing the United States of America from the organization, we remove the tool that they use to act with impunity. So it doesn't matter whether they're in the United Nations or whether they're not. They must act within international law. They just won't be allowed to not be held accountable anymore, because the United Nations currently is the organization granting them that ability.
Yeah, if the U.S. is expelled from the United Nations, they won't stop being under international law. They will stop being above international law. Because that's what they've been able to achieve by their domination of the United Nations. Of course, they will still be obligated to all of the treaties and all of the agreements and documents that constitute international law, but by expelling them from the United Nations, they can actually finally be held accountable to all of those documents and agreements and treaties and so forth.
I think I just wanted to add the fact that we saw 3 ceasefire resolutions being passed with overwhelming majorities in the General Assembly is kind of proof enough to show that the global consensus has shifted away from this ideology that Israel has a right to defend itself. And especially now that the ICJ has come out to say that Israel is actually illegally occupying Gaza and saying that the Palestinian people have the right to armed resistance, but Israel doesn't have the right to self-defense. This shows that countries are no longer willing to sacrifice themselves in favor of the West. And I think this kind of proves that we can achieve the 128 to 129 majority that we need, which is a 2/3 majority out of the 193 that we need. So just the fact that what we've seen over the last year in the G-side in Gaza and how countries have reacted to that, and having multiple General Assembly votes that were overwhelming majority in favor of Palestine, we know that the general global consensus is actually way far further away from the West than we initially anticipated about a year ago.
Plus, isolating the U.S. has to do with the rest of the world more so than the U.S. When it's sanctioned, the rest of the world would adhere to those sanctions and block the U.S. So they are, of course, obligated under international law, but there's the rest of the world too.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just see this comment over here asking us to announce how to sign the petition again. So you can go into any one of our bios, either Sister Iman, Brother Shahid, Sister Nisa's, Brother Rayleigh's. We all have a link in our bios where you can just click and sign the petition. It will ask you at the end to chip in $3 or £3, depending on where you are. You don't have to. That money doesn't come to us. It goes to change.org. You can just skip the $3 donation process entirely if you just share the petition with your friends and family at the end. It really just costs nothing to sign the petition aside from just 2 minutes of your time.
Thank you, Aaron. To South Africans, I think I just wanted to say something when it comes to the importance of this petition. And I think I need to put emphasis on the fact that this is invoked to remove the US specifically. The US has too much power that they've appointed to themselves. During our general elections, the Democratic Alliance sent an email to America to assist us in our general elections. Now, assuming that South Africa is a democracy, let's assume that we're a democracy. What part does another country have in playing when it comes to our general election? That shows you the extent of how much power America has assigned to themselves, but also how much money has been given to different states that interferes in the different policies and governance of different countries that affects us directly. It affects us directly. And that is why it is important that America, we really need to chop their wings, just a bit. Just someone needs to chop just a bit so that they can humble themselves, because what America has done over the last couple of decades is beyond human rights violations. You cannot even call it that, because they have continuously perpetuated this system of oppression that comes at the expense of all of our people. So this is not a racial thing. This is not a religious thing. This is a human rights issue. And it's something that we all need to partake in, because we all understand how much power America has assigned to itself, not even by us, to itself. And that's something that we can partake in. So when we say, when you look at constitution, South Africa's constitution says, we the people. As the global, as citizens of the globe, it's the one thing that we always need to remember, that when it comes to power, no one has power until we give them that power. There is no country that has power without the people, and it is important that we continuously remind each other of how much power we have as individuals, and most importantly, as a collective, when we have a common goal. And right now, the common goal is to save humanity. The common goal is to remove America as a dominant force that comes at the expense of oppressing our people. That, to me, is the most important thing of invoking Article 6. Very important. Just needed to say that. Nisa, is there anyone else? I just want to look at the questions. Yes.
Most of it. Sorry, Samantha.
I'd like to add to what you said with regards to, because people are asking in the comments, how can we donate? You don't need to donate anything, no money. All we need is your signature and sign the petition and share the petition. You as an individual, we as individuals cannot go to the United Nations and invoke Article 6 on our own. We need a member state to do that. So by you signing and you sharing the petition, that is your contribution, which is just as crucial as actually going to the United Nations and standing there and delivering a speech or whatever it is that you need to do. Signing the petition is your contribution to world peace, to global security, to respect for international law. It's important that you see that that is just as important as going physically to the United Nations and standing there and whatever it is, filling out the forms, delivering a speech, speaking. It's the same. It has the same value. So please do sign and do share the petition. You'll find the links in our bios. And but it's important. Please do share it as well.
Thank you, Nisa. Melo, is there anyone that can we take a few questions from the viewers? Is there anyone that we can perhaps remove from the panel and then we can open one box, or no?
For sure. We were thinking of making this where we stop, where things are very interesting, where we can continue the discussion at our lives or in this place. So what do you think? Because we have been over 2.5 hours. So is anybody up to it? Like two questions, and then we will do a wrap up. Like the question has got to be relevant to Article 6. We cannot tangent because we can do that in our lives at an unlimited time. So yes, I think we can do two questions with regards to Article 6 as you would like, and we will bring one of us down and then give another 10 minutes, something like that. Thank you very much, Samantha.
I think I can leave the panel and I'll create just one space.
Thank you, Ariane. So the thing with my lives is that my lives tend to go on very long. So I always would allocate 4 hours, and it will normally become 6 hours and 7 hours. So a lot of the people that come into I know, Mr. Bolton's looking at me like, are you insane? I sat here once for 11 hours, and I'm not joking, I swear. So that is what I think that's why a lot of people are like, but one, guys, can you please follow everyone on the panel that's sitting on the panel? They'll have the petitions in their bio, sign the petitions, go into the lives. If you have any other questions pertaining to what we just discussed, kindly go into the lives. It's 7 p.m. South African time. Nisa, please correct me if I'm wrong. This is based on the information I found. 7 p.m. South African time, you can go in, you can ask these questions, but it's very important that we get the petition to 100,000. And again, I cannot emphasize this enough. It is about removing the US as a member of the United Nations. That's the most important thing, and it starts with us. United for Palestine.
United for Palestine. You
Hi,
can
good
pose
day.
your question, sir.
Hi, good day. There's a little input which I always say, and I do believe activism is very important role. Right, my stance and my belief is that people need to be more active with their governments, get involved, because if you don't put your voice out there, you're not going to get anything out. So that's the contribution for me. From United for, excuse me.
Are you still there?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. We just lost him. So I think we'll finish at 3. I just wanted to we 1 minute, ask a question. It needs to pertain to Article 6, please, guys, and then we will wrap it up by 3. Freedom Fighter?
Yeah. Oh, hi. How's everyone?
Very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Firstly, thank you, Samantha, for always hosting these lovely panels. And it's a privilege to have Brother Shahid here amongst us. Sir, it's always a pleasure to hear your opinions and your analysis of all that is going on. May Allah give you the protection and a long life of speaking truth. In regards to the Article 6, I'm not trying to knock the wind out of this movement, and it has to continue. But my question is, are we not, by always focusing on diplomatic solutions that are never respected by the West, are we therefore fighting a losing battle? Should we not be decentralizing our efforts against imperialist states and their objectives by spreading their attention, by causing a bit more, I don't want to use the word harassment, but I mean create discomfort for their members and their supporters throughout the world? In South Africa, Cape Town, we have a heavy Zionist presence. If this Zionist presence feels uncomfortable, this affects the people back in occupied Palestine. We cannot rely on the Americans or the imperialists to respect our calls to human dignity. They have shown blatantly that this is not a concern to them on any level. Every veto, despite the facts presented to them, they insult our intelligence and proceed to veto anyway. The other matter is we can't ignore that this United States has a massive military budget which reflects in its ability to manipulate not only military related actions, but also diplomatic. We've seen it applied to the ICC, the under the table pressure applied to Mr. Khan, who was asking for the arrest warrant of Netanyahu and Yoav Golan. This financing is a big threat. The military aspect is a big threat. Because the reality, sorry, if I just want to finish this point. So, the main issue I have is the military aspect provides the Americans with might makes right. And we are all victim to this one law that seems to supersede all other laws. I mean, can someone give me an example where international law...
You've practically answered
Yes.
your own question. That's what I wanted to say. You've practically answered your own question, especially in the beginning part, when you said, well, they're not going to respect what we say because, you know, they're going to veto this, and why would we centralize the imperialist ideologies and everything in the middle? Well, you're answering it yourself because as civilians, there is a limited amount of things you can do, right? If we protest on the streets, they allow you to protest on the streets. They allow you to put your voice out there so long as nothing happens from it. Because no matter how many times we protest, nothing's going to happen. The BDS movement has been proven to be very effective because we're actually targeting economies. We're targeting the economic section of all of this. And then when we talk about the fact that we want to remove the United States from the United Nations, we are not centralizing the imperialists in the middle and making sure that they have more power. In fact, we're doing the quite literal opposite. We want to remove this veto power that the United States has by removing them entirely from the United Nations and not just removing this veto power they have. We are not just saying, oh, we don't like what America is doing and stuff like that. If we speak like this and we don't actually take action, it makes no sense whatsoever. And talking about the military-industrial complex and the fact that the US funds 40% of it, they would no longer be able to do this if they are no longer in the United Nations, because they can no longer authorize their war crimes and the war crimes of their allies through the abuse of the United Nations and the abuse of the veto power. And the reason why we don't remove Israel from the United Nations is because the US can immediately veto that in the Security Council, and Israel isn't the problem. The Zionists are not the problem. They are a problem, but the biggest problem in the entire world that we've seen over the last 80 years has been the United States of America because of their unilateralism. We need to remove this US hegemony, and what we're doing has proven to be effective because, like Brother Shahid said, he said some people in the United Nations have thanked him for this, meaning that what we're doing is not on a civilian level. What we're doing is on a diplomatic level, and working on a diplomatic level doesn't require respect. It does not require respect, like you said. They won't respect what we say. It requires action, and it requires that we work together to be able to remove this hegemonous state from the entire world, to be able to stop them from doing what they're doing in the entire world, to stop them from creating this mask of Zionism, saying, well, Zionism is the problem, and putting all the blame on Jewish people as they're doing right now. We know that the problem is them, their white supremacist megalomaniac ideology, and that's what we need to remove from their own exceptionalism across the entire world.
I mean, I would also say you need to understand what Zionism is and what the Zionists are and what Israel is. It's just the Jewish brigade of Western imperialism. Don't think of the Zionists as being something distinct or some powerful force. They're just a brigade of Western imperialism. So if you want to resolve the issue in Palestine, you want to resolve the conflict between the Palestinians and the so-called Israelis, the only way to do that is to go directly to the source of the problem, which is the United States. And again, as Sister Iman said, and as we've said repeatedly throughout this program, everything that you're talking about even the military power and so forth of the United States, all of this is only, they're only able to use this power. They're only able to inflict upon others this power and threaten others with this power because of their impunity. And their impunity is based exclusively upon their control of the United Nations, so that they can operate above the law and never be held to account. So expelling them from the United Nations enables that body to hold them to account and impose punitive / rehabilitative measures on the United States to actually make them act right on the global stage. There's not another way. And I'm not really even sure what you were talking about in terms of decentralization. This sounds like a lot of theory to me that doesn't actually, it doesn't sound very coherent to me. If you're talking about decentralizing and so forth, I'm not sure how countries in the world, countries in the global south, and activists in the global south, not operating with solidarity, but acting in a decentralized way, which is just another way of saying not in solidarity and not in unity. I'm not sure how that would be against the interests of those who want to dominate them.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. One last question, and then we'll go. LOCD, can you ask your question, please?
Hey, I'm sorry. I'm just coming into this conversation, and as an American, I'm just trying to understand. I'm sure I've been asking so many questions, but oh my God. So if the U.S. is taken out of the UN, what if I heard you guys saying that they can veto everything because they're one of the founders, and that the money is the influence and stuff like that? Would that work? Would taking us out the UN work? I'm worried about what we do as a country too, and we see it here as living here, and we see that the monolithic thought process and the white supremacy, we see it, and we also see it across the world. As a Black American, I can't really travel without feeling it, and I'm just wondering if it's going to actually do anything.
Yes, I'll take that question. Absolutely. It would affect every single person on the planet, including the United States of America. I noticed you mentioned that you weren't here for the entire life, but we did discuss violations internationally, violations domestically. Currently, the United States of America is using the United Nations as a tool to commit crimes across the globe, including within America, with impunity. They use the organization to get away with the crimes. Now, if you remove that tool that allows them to get away with a crime and you hold them accountable for what they are doing, they will stop. With the world now moving and isolating the United States of America, and the world is shifting towards alliances within the global south, within BRICS nations, that is huge on global peace and security, and that is huge on upholding the principles of the United Nations. You will find that global peace and security is not something that we just talk about. It is possible because United Nations, because the United States of America would use the organization for peacekeeping operations, which we all know are not peacekeeping operations. That's just a name. When it comes to them using it within the countries where they are plundering resources, where are they abusing the people, those peacekeeping nations are the opposite of what they are saying. So, and they do that using the United Nations. So removing them from the organization, they will not be allowed to do that. There would be no peacekeeping organizations anymore, and there would not be all these crimes being committed in the name of peacekeeping, when in fact it is that they are the biggest enemies of peace. So yes, it will be effective. It will be, and it will lead to global peace, to global security, where all other member states have an equal say, and that there isn't just one country that believes that they are above the law.
Just to add one quick thing, he asked how would that work with the veto power. There's an article in the United Nations Charter, Article 27, which will force the U.S. to abstain from that vote because the matter pertains to them.
Someone added Faraz.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I know that it was supposed to be the last question. I don't know why I'm up. Do you have time for me, or I can?
Sorry, Sammy, I added him because I saw on the comment section, he had a lot of questions. It's just that there were a lot, but I could not take all of them down. So, and I also did not have a chance to share his questions.
But he
No
dropped
worries,
it.
Firas is always in our lives. He's in every single one of our lives. He's always here. So
You can always
he
come
always
to our
asks
lab
really good
anytime.
questions.
Oh, okay. No, it's fine then. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we'll be good. If there's anything else, any closing statements that anyone wants to make, Mr. Bolton, if you, Shahid, I know you said I mustn't call you Mr. Bolton. I've been calling you that. It's just respect. Can I also just say, the first time that I spoke to you, I thought you were AI. I was convinced there's no way this is the same person.
I don't know. I don't understand. I get that so many times. I get that comment every time. I don't understand it. It's a generational thing, I guess. I always get that.
Probably not even. I think it's because I followed you for your. I think I followed. Is it the Middle Nation account? Not you. And then when you followed me, because your account followed me first, I was like, "There's no way this is the same person." I was convinced it was. I was like, "There is no way that Shahid Bolton is following me. It has to be AI."
Oh, come on. You're being too modest. Your content, mashallah, is fantastic. It's very informative. It's so insightful. I get a great education on the situation in South Africa from following your content. It's so valuable.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I think you were amazing. So I think that's also why I thought you were AI. Your content is incredible,
I mean,
very informative.
As I always say whenever that comment comes, if I was AI, would I be bald?
True. Valid, very valid point. Thank you very much. Any closing statements from Shahid? Any closing statements?
All I would say is thank you so much for hosting us. I'm sorry that we don't have the staying power that you do for your 11-hour lives. This is probably one of the longest that we've done, and I think it's we've been following also the signatures on the petition, and they have spiked quite a bit thanks to your hosting us. So I appreciate it so much, and I'm very grateful for the support, and I'm very grateful to everyone who joined in. And I'll just again plug the petition. Please sign the petition, and understand that the petition is a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. The petition is specifically so that we can gauge popular support, grassroots, global support for the invocation of Article 6, so that we can hopefully, inshallah, give confidence when we raise this to the political and diplomatic level, so that member states will understand that, in fact, there is a global demand for the expulsion of the United States from the United Nations. So please, again, go to the petition. You can find it, a link to it in any of the bios of any of the speakers on our respective accounts. So please do sign it and share it with your family and friends. And we also do these lives almost every night, and we do a space on X every Monday or so. And then also I talk about it regularly on my YouTube channel, the Middle Nation YouTube channel. And also, if anyone is interested in helping in the campaign, either to help organize in your own community and to spread the message and share the message with activists in your community, or to become a speaker and to participate in these lives and to help raise the awareness, you can also join the Middle Nation Telegram channel. That's where we do most of our organizing, is on Telegram. So anyone who's interested in that, I would ask you to support it and join us if you can. But again, thank you so much for your time.